Chapter 391. It had already been 3 days since the negotiation with a certain emperor ended. After the minor storm, the city seemed to have returned to normal. However, in my opinion, this was only the calm before the storm. Mills Milan, the most devout prince of the Bardi royal family. He was diligent all his life and shed blood for his country. Emperor Orlos XIII highly regarded him. But today he was assassinated by a despicable assassin. Those hypocritical villains even disguised themselves as allies of the mage country in an attempt to incite discord between the two countries. But under the wise eyes of Emperor Orlos, how could such a clumsy trick possibly be effective? There can only be one truth. The assassin is the Holy Church. Although it sounded ridiculous, this was indeed the truth that everyone wanted to see. Mill's assassination had already been determined. He had been killed by an assassin sent by the Holy Church. As for the so-called Dark Elf assassin, that was only a convenient way to frame Bardi's closest ally, the mage country. When the citizens saw the announcements outside the city walls the next morning, their expressions were enough to hide what it meant by, "The world is changing so quickly that I don't know anything." Of course, rumors were already flying everywhere. However, rumors were sometimes very useful, such as when a country was in chaos. But sometimes they would only become interesting stories that even the tabloids didn't dare to publish, such as this incident. The next day, Mill's funeral was held. It seemed that the Bardi royal guards wanted to hurry up and put a final conclusion on this incident. But from a certain standpoint, holding a grand funeral for Mills in the name of Bardi was actually giving Mills a lot of face. The next day, when Bardi's royal guards went to clean up Mill's residence, they unexpectedly discovered evidence that the undead had colluded with the undead. They then investigated the information they obtained from Mills and raided the residences of 2 other princes. The reason? It was actually quite simple. What the princes wanted the most right now was someone who was capable of fighting. Naturally, the undead were quite capable of fighting. Plus, with their previous friendship, the princes easily hooked up with the undead. Apart from providing cover for the undead, the princes would also provide food for the bloodthirsty undead. Judging from the dozen or so outsiders that Mills had plundered from his basement and the punishment room, it was no mistake that Jan had directly judged Mills as a sinner of the most heinous crimes. Judging from the testimony of the rescued man, he had been corrupted for a long time. He, who worshipped the evil god of misery in private, made rapid progress and also used a large number of offerings with his own hands. He was once a true soldier. He once fought for his comrades for 2 days and 2 nights in a desperate situation. He once swore in front of me that he would change the Bardi military's corrupt and inefficient aristocratic system. Now, I've harmed him. After listening to the eunuch's report, the old emperor sat in the garden in a daze for the whole morning. In the end, he could only squeeze out these words. Perhaps, as a hero who returned from a hellish battlefield, his firm will was able to withstand the most desperate situation, but after 10 years of wealth and power, he had unknowingly become the man he once hated the most. Let's have a grand burial. Perhaps this was the last bit of sympathy the old emperor had for the successor candidate whom he once had high hopes for. The next day's funeral was for the 3 princes. Of course, to the public, the Holy Church's assassins were trying to kill the heroic princes in an attempt to create conflict between the 2 countries, perhaps even inciting a war. And so, the Holy Church was implicated again. Why did I say again? Actually, it wasn't wrong for the Holy Church to be implicated. Humans were creatures that were naturally inclined towards the light. The God of light, the God of holy light, and so on would naturally benefit from his teachings. Ignoring whether or not this inclination came from the sun itself, when a holy church that represented light and justice ruled over more than half of humanity's spiritual and religious beliefs, from a certain standpoint, the Holy Church had absolute control. Why was that? because as long as the Holy Church gave a certain opinion or action that was correct, it would be meaningless for others to oppose it. And actually, considering how difficult it would be for the Holy Church to reach a consensus, it would be enough if the Holy Church could reach a third of its belief. And it just so happened that in the world of He, the number of holy light believers in the human world was more than a third. Absolute power meant absolute corruption. But what did absolute divine authority mean? You immaculately dressed holy light bishops claim that everything you do is authorized by the God of holy light. In that case, if the God of holy light guarantees your rationality and morality, then who will guarantee the God of holy light's rationality and justice? At the very least, from what I've seen, people with benevolent expressions are beastly, and people who are thieving like chickens and stealing like dogs are using the name of God. According to your logic, since you hypocrites haven't received divine punishment yet, could it be that your true God has already lost his rationality? Is God dead? Or has God gone mad as well? A certain insane blasphemer, whose name had been erased, unknowingly spread his words throughout the entire world. It was rumored that this insane blasphemer, who was laughing maniacally on a stake, was once a devout cardinal. His crime was to personally kill several colleagues of his who played with boys. One of them was even his teacher. However, I feel that his greatest crime was telling the truth, that God had gone mad. Perhaps it was instinctive for humans to worship the light, but it was also instinctive for humans to break free from shackles and restraints. Not to mention the natural conflict between royalty and divine authority. Most importantly, the Holy Church, which had absolute divine authority, was constantly rotting, and reforming. Naturally, there would be no end to those who resisted. Ordinary plants would be unable to survive in deserts without water or soil. Seeds of discord would often grow on cliffs filled with cracks. Pure holy light doesn't require belief in a false god. The Holy Church only believed in a false god who borrowed the name of holy light. Prince Mills, Prince Thomas, and Prince Catalan were all holy disciples who believed in pure holy light. Their deaths were the result of an evil god's fear of true belief. Archbishop Amoy of the Southern sect angrily berated the Holy Church's hypocrisy and shamelessness in front of all the nobles and merchants of Bardi while displaying his own holy light. Only the light is eternal. In the name of the first Pope of the Holy Church, I declare these three princes to be martyred holy disciples. We shall fight for revenge, for justice, and for pure holy light. A coincidence created history. Since there was an opportunity in front of them, the Church of Pure Holy Light stepped onto the stage of history. Archbishop Amoy also became Pope Amoy I, and the three wicked villains also became holy apostles. In the background was the tearful old Emperor Halent, who had just lost his beloved son. Archduke Halent took the lead in making an ancient vow, using a small knife to cut a scar on his face, vowing revenge, and then angrily roaring in response to the people's cries. We've lived here for generations, but those hypocritical villains actually judged us as heretics, invaded our land, and killed our citizens. Fine then, since they want war, we'll give them war. Victory to Bardi. By the time Halent's speech came to an end, the funeral turned into a pledging ceremony. Now that everyone was shouting "Victory to Bardi" together, war was no longer a symbol. In the crowd, I covered my mouth with my cape to prevent myself from laughing out loud. I lowered my head and smiled as I explained to Glina next to me. The righteous Halent? The sincere Orlas? The pure and holy Mills? At this moment, the relationship between holy and evil was so ambiguous. This was the royal family, famous for being snakes and scorpions. Perhaps this is why I always feel that human nature is so difficult to understand, and why humans are so interesting. Chapter 392. From a certain standpoint, the recent series of events had greatly helped Orlas. It wasn't that he was helping Orlas declare war against the Holy Church, as this had already been planned from the very start. The true result of this series of events was that Orlos had made up his mind and chosen Halent as his successor. Since the successor to the throne had already been decided, the other candidates were naturally unnecessary. And so, after a grand ceremony, all the princes declared, "We've been deeply influenced by Brother Mill's example. We're all willing to follow in Brother Mill's footsteps and go to the most dangerous places, to the lowest levels, to the front lines of the battlefield. We'll fight for our country and our family as ordinary soldiers, and we'll take revenge for our country and our family." Therefore, the princes volunteered to be the bottom-level commanders. They were either sent to the meat grinder in the front line of Nitrain City or to the Crusade army in the east that was about to set off, becoming glorious cannon fodder in the front line. Orlos didn't take things too far. He didn't announce Halent's true identity to the public yet, nor did he explicitly state that Bardi's emperor had to have outstanding military talent, military achievements. In fact, Orlos even told every prince to bring along their strongest subordinates, no more than 10. If their subordinates were strong enough and they were able to achieve enough military achievements, it was possible that the position of crown prince could be replaced. Of course, considering that Halent was the city lord of Nitrain City and had a squadron of Dragon Knight troops under his command, it would be incredibly difficult for the other princes to make a comeback. Basically, this was only a theoretical possibility. Serves them right. What were they doing earlier? If they had focused their attention on killing off other competitors, they wouldn't have fallen to such a state. Since some people were angry about this type of mainstream opinion became more and more common under the influence of others. Not everyone focused their attention on the throne. There were princes who had already achieved a certain level of success in certain areas. For example, the 39th prince, Prince Ain't, was quite accomplished in the field of art. He had even helped many impoverished artists, and he was also quite a famous connoisseur of art. At this time, Orlos immediately gave him the position of vice-chairman of the Bardi Artists Association. Orlos's meaning was quite obvious. This prince could forget about his dream of becoming emperor, but being a romantic prince was no problem. From a certain standpoint, people like Aint were the smart ones, but with the throne in front of them, even the smartest young man would selectively choose to be stupid. There were very few people who would give up fighting for the throne after becoming a prince and focus on something else. And when the outcome of the battle was revealed in advance, and they were faced with the misfortune of being forced to become cannon fodder, it wasn't that none of the princes had other thoughts. There were quite a few princes who were colluding with other factions and local domain lords. There were also quite a few princes who urgently mobilized their troop. Not only that, apart from the reorganized Royal Knight squadrons, there were also several adult dragons escorting the princes. Most of the princes didn't need to think too much about this. If there's a majority, there's a minority? Did a prince make a move? That's right, of course there were fanatics who viewed the throne as their only goal in life. The end result was that assassins from the Holy Church appeared a few more times. Next month, it was likely that they would have to find time to organize another mass funeral. When internal conflicts reached a certain degree of intensity, it would become a common tactic of certain countries to focus their citizens' attention on the battlefield. Nitrain City was about to receive the strongest reinforcements in its history. 1/4 of the Bardi domain lords had sent out their personal armies, and several dozen princes had brought their personal retainers to lead the front lines. The newly born southern sect would replace the Holy Church in fighting against the undead. This was a chance for them to prove themselves to the world. Meanwhile, Halent himself was leading his personal retainers and an army of nearly 200,000 soldiers to fight against the invading Holy War army. Did this seem inconceivable? Halent was clearly the city lord of Nitrain City, and the defending troops there were all his personal retainers and himself. Yet, he had actually sent them to fight on another battlefront? Wasn't this a typical example of giving random orders? It seemed inexplicable, but it was actually completely worthless. It was just a consideration outside of the battlefield. Right now, Halent was no longer a general who led the charge. Instead, he was a king who stabilized the country. Unlike small border countries that only had princes as generals, major countries valued stability and authority. So-called face was also a tangible benefit. As the crown prince and the next emperor, Halent couldn't afford to lose. Orlos couldn't allow Halent to lose either. Otherwise, the royal family's authority would decrease, which would cause a chain reaction that even major countries wouldn't be able to endure. This was especially so now that the domain lords were getting restless. If the royal family lost, ambitious individuals would start taking action as well. That was why the major countries wouldn't personally lead an army unless it was absolutely necessary. After all, while having the emperor personally lead an army to boost morale, they also had to consider the chain reaction that would occur if the emperor was defeated or even captured. That's right, they would lose. Even though the southern battlefront had far more undead troops than the eastern battlefront, considering the possibility of an undead emperor interfering, and the fact that the undead emperors had already entered a new phase of the Holy War, no matter how strong the southern battlefront was, nobody was certain how the southern battlefront would turn out. In the east, even though the Holy Church's famous generals were stationed there, the Holy Church's expeditionary army had become extremely frightened after being baptized by the dragons. Not only that, the Holy Church had cut off all of their spies and reinforcements, not to mention that the Holy Church had sent their elite squadrons and ace troops. If they still couldn't win, there was no point in keeping the Holy Church's crown prince alive. To be honest, when I heard that Halent's army even had 2 dragons elders and several immemorial dragons, I knew that it would be impossible for Halent to lose even if he wanted to. Not only Orlos, even the dragons won't allow Halent to lose. And after taking care of the eastern battlefront's remnants, Halent could still go to the southern battlefront to fight for more achievements. And if he lost the southern battlefront, he would be able to save his country at a critical moment and reverse the situation. Don't worry about not being strong enough, Orlos will mobilize all of his country. Once the Holy Church completely enters a state of war, the foundational strength of a mega-empire will truly be terrifying. What if the southern battlefront directly wins? Wouldn't Halent be inferior to them? That's even better. Halent is the city lord of Nitrain City, and his subordinates will be the cornerstone of victory. His defenses against the undead will be the theoretical basis for defeating the undead. Halent will still be the greatest contributor. How deceitful. Doesn't that mean that no matter if he wins or loses, he'll benefit the most? What's so special about a guaranteed profit? Indeed deceitful, but this is politics. His ascension to the throne will be the most beneficial for Bardi. This was another benefit of choosing Halent as the next Bardi emperor. The dragons had already used their actions to express the greatest amount of goodwill towards Orlos and Bardi. Perhaps just based on his relationship with the dragons, Halent would always be one of the top candidates for the throne. Now that this candidate's name was finally confirmed, the next Bardi emperor would become the bridge between the two species. When considering the grim reality of the Holy War, it was only natural for the Bardi Empire and Dragon World's dragons to band together. The relationship between the Bardi Empire and the Dragon World's dragons would definitely become closer and closer. Orlos is indeed a sly old fox. He sees far into the future. It probably has something to do with those prophecies you left behind back then. If you didn't make it sound so serious, why would he be preparing for the worst-case scenario from the very start? I don't remember what I said back then either, but I'm guessing that I definitely made it sound the most serious. All prophets are like that. Only by making the future sound like Armageddon will others help you save your life. And based on my personal habits, I was most likely telling the truth back then. The seeds that I casually planted back then had now grown into towering trees. At the very least, from the current situation, Bardi had already escaped from the worst-case scenario in the game's history. and as long as Bardi didn't collapse, the Mage country and the other neighboring countries wouldn't be too isolated in the upcoming calamity. Everything seemed to still be there. Plus, the southern sect had been discovered, and the Holy Church would definitely suffer a calamity on the eastern battlefront. If there was anything that could make me happier than good news, it would probably be bad news about my enemy. I had been in a good mood recently. You don't intend on interfering? Why would I interfere when I have nothing better to do? Since I'm feeling this way, I need to think more about my own future. Besides, that sly old fox doesn't want me to participate. The southern sect. I only had a short conversation with that Amoya the First, and that old fox personally came to disturb me. Didn't you see how that sly old fox almost wrote "Be careful of Roland" on his face? He even purposely asked me to play chess, chat, and drink tea with him. His chess skills are terrible, and he wouldn't let me leave even after I lost several dozen games. He wasted half a night. Although the Church of Pure Holy Light was established in Bardi and had a close relationship with the royalty, when considering Roland's relationship with this church, as well as the immeasurable nature of religious believers, to be more direct, fanatics were willing to do anything for the sake of their faith. If Roland really did say that the Holy Light calls for the Northlands to be the Holy Land, that sly old fox wouldn't even be able to cry. Indeed, his worries weren't unnecessary. You're not angry at being wrongly accused? Your temper is getting better and better. No, he didn't wrongly accuse me. In fact, that sly old fox even saw the agreement I prepared. You really did try to poach him. Can you at least have some shame? Shame? What's that? Is it edible? Why can't we poach him? After all, our relationship with the Holy Church is terrible enough. The God of Holy Light is allied with the Law God, and the God of Holy Light himself has a rather ambiguous attitude towards the Holy Church. We can totally accept the Church of Pure Holy Light. Holy Knight and Holy Light priests are the most popular job classes in battle. Our warriors also need the support of the Holy Light. But Orlas is still the better one. At the very least, you failed. Who said that? I succeeded. So what if Orlas was right in front of me? You can't possibly stop two Holy Light job classes from exchanging their understanding of the Holy Light, can you? Even if that lousy chess player wants to play chess with me, I'll defeat Amoya the First in a debate about the Holy Church's teachings and also checkmate that sly old fox. Amazing, right? I became even happier as I talked about how the sly old fox did his best to maintain a smile even though he was obviously furious. You're amazing, especially when it comes to being shameless. Is the Southern sect really intending to leave Bardi and give up on such a good base? Of course that's impossible. Amoya and his bishops aren't idiots, either, since they were able to reach this point. However, they'll soon establish branch churches in the Mist Alliance countries to spread the teachings of pure holy light. Amoya has also agreed to have his number one disciple go to Donglan to become a regional bishop. He'll also have more than 2,000 core members. The Mist Alliance will no longer lack holy light job classes in the future. For the Southern sect, this is also an opportunity to establish a backup plan and expand their influence. This is obviously a win-win situation. We don't even have to worry about them not doing their best. Orlas won't be able to stop them even if he wants to. Aren't you afraid of causing a religious conflict in the Northlands? There's already the Church of Law there, along with the undead. I'm not afraid. I've been going there quite often recently in order to confirm the Southern sect's teachings and then decide my attitude towards them. As expected of the Holy Bible that I personally wrote. Although there were some changes as I passed down the Holy Bible, it's still quite mild. Don't judge people based on their race or birth. Hope that the holy light will shine like the sun, warm and not burn any existence. Holy light will only punish evil brought about by evil deed. Perhaps this is the true nature of holy light. It's the true nature of holy light that you understand. Still, it's indeed a wonderful thing to have a holy knight who isn't hostile towards the undead. You didn't go there just to confirm their teachings, did you? At the very least, judging from how you won against Amoya in a debate, are you trying to change their teachings? The silly cat rolled her eyes. Even though it was clearly a question, she used an affirmative sentence, as if she had already seen through everything. Heh, there's still a chance for me to change my teachings now. Once they really spread, it'll be impossible to change them anymore. I'm the original author of the Holy Light Church, and Amoya, the doujinshi author, is seriously asking me how to set up the Holy Light Church. I intend to teach them all about my understanding of holy light so that they can change their teachings within acceptable limit. This is going to be quite a troublesome matter. Amoya's about to head out with the army, so I need to hurry up. After the old fox leaves the church, I'm going to have a chat with him. It's fine as long as everything goes smoothly. But for things to go so smoothly, it feels a little strange. Is something wrong with the way things are going? You don't say. I also feel like something's wrong recently. How could my luck ever be so good? It's so smooth recently that I'm even a little afraid. I'm thinking that if there really is a problem, it's most likely that Halent lost by a large margin. Why are you covering my mouth? Shut up, you damned jinx. Haven't you caused enough trouble yet? Chapter 393. In a small and private courtyard, a man's battle against a woman was nearing its end. The woman was already moaning weakly on the ground. Have you had enough? You've been doing this for an entire night. Even I can't take it anymore. You go take your medicine when you're tired, but I don't even have a moment to rest. I've never seen someone as shameless as you. Her petite body was only covered by a silk scarf, but it was now completely soaked. Her childlike face was flushed red from overexertion. Perhaps I should be proud that I was able to make the famous snake archduchess reveal such a helpless expression. The human body was filled with countless secret, high-level undead were able to mimic normal human physiological reactions, not just for pleasure. It would seem that the snake archduchess had already recovered many of her sensory organs and bodily fluids in order to develop her body's potential. Since you can't take it anymore, just lie down and enjoy it. Yep, if you can't take it anymore, just spread your legs and lie down. Damn it, who threw a brick at me? I laughed in delight as I listened to the snake archduchess' exhausted moans. However, someone suddenly turned around and threw a brick at me. Stop talking nonsense. There's an underage here. Is there any meaning in purposefully making it sound so ambiguous? What bodily fluids? Why don't you just call it sweat? I glanced around and saw that Gleena, Tim Lad, and the other underage undead were all looking at me with great interest. Damn it, what were those high-powered binoculars and memory crystals for? Were they intending to make copies and sell them for money? If they sold well, remember to split the profits with me. She was so amused that I couldn't help but follow her. Alexandra, get up. It's time for the 121st round of training. Let's continue. This time, we need to last for at least 30 seconds. Yep, this was only pure martial arts training. I didn't have the habit of torturing prisoners. As for all the other useless things, I naturally didn't have any when I was being stared at by a group of people. I just wanted an eye-pleasing maid that was suitable for maid. As a man, was there anything wrong with that? Ahem, getting back on topic, there wasn't anything particularly disharmonious happening in my private courtyard. I really wanted to put on an interrogation play or something, but right after I excitedly created one of the 10 great tortures of the Manchurian Qing dynasty using ice, the snake archduchess unhesitatingly confessed everything. How could you surrender so easily? Where's your honor and loyalty? You've tempered your body hundreds and thousands of times? Where is your unyielding heart as a warrior monk? How could he do it just like that? Wouldn't I have no sense of accomplishment then? Honor? There was no honor for the dead. Loyalty? The king I served is dead. All right, she surrendered so confidently. What she said made too much sense. I was suddenly rendered speechless. Actually, using the senators under my command as an example, I didn't expect too much from the undead lord's loyalty and honor. They had already died once, so they didn't care too much about anything other than their stubbornness. Yep, to be more direct, they were a bunch of bastards with no morals and no faith. And in the undead plains, when undead lords fought against each other, the winner would obtain everything. The strong preyed on the weak, and submitting to the strong was already engraved in the undead plains' bloodlines. Surrendering wasn't something the undead lords needed to think too much about, especially when the undead lords were fighting against another undead emperor. I've already done my best. This counts as me repaying Lord Osso for canceling our soul contract before his death. Of course, I didn't dare to believe such information that came too easily. Undead also had their own ways of communicating with each other. While it was true that I could obtain information by extracting the undead lord's soul, it would be far too wasteful. Using a soul contract to establish a subservient relationship was the most common and effective method. A soul contract was a contract where the master would die with the servant. Any undead lord with even the slightest bit of backbone would never sign such a contract unless it was absolutely necessary. And Osso indeed obtained the loyalty of these proud undead lords. At the very least, no matter how much I threatened him, he wouldn't be willing to sign a soul contract. Taking a step back, it took me quite a bit of brainstorming just to get a myth-ranked undead to sign a slave contract with a mandatory order. At the very least, the 10 great tortures I showed her had basically no effect at all. In the end, I took out my ice flames and threatened her to become an eternal ice sculpture, so she obediently agreed. But even though she surrendered and easily sold out all of her teammates, we still didn't gain anything from this. The Snake Archduchess herself had only been in the mortal plane for less than a year. She was an elite undead lord who belonged to Osso. She was a lone undead lord. To put it nicely, she had a high status and authority, but to put it bluntly, she was like a lone commander who had suddenly been transferred to an unfamiliar department. She definitely wouldn't be able to communicate with Osso in the mortal plane anymore after she was captured. Most of Osso's core subordinates had been dug out, and Alexandra didn't know much to begin with. Now, the only useful information she had on the undead emperors and undead lords was probably the Snake Archduchess's personality and abilities. None of them would be useful in the short term. I don't keep useless people here. If it's food expenses, pay with your body. Why are you all looking at me like that? Did I say something wrong? She's such a rare opponent. She'll be perfect for training in martial arts. Come, let's spar. It seemed that there had been a problem recently. My words always seemed to go off in strange directions. But for me, the Snake Archduchess' greatest value right now was to train in martial art. If it wasn't for this armor, I would have already died several hundred times over. I like to summarize things after a battle because any problems revealed in a real battle would always be incredibly fatal. For example, it would be quite easy to solve a problem after a save and load. Of course, if you didn't make it through, it would be even more effective to summarize your experience after reviving. Normally, a bad ending would give you a lot of experience in the game, and you would even be able to inherit your equipment and experience. Unfortunately, there weren't many opportunities like this in the real world, and time wouldn't allow me to reincarnate endlessly. Otherwise, I would sooner or later become a perfect model. It seemed that the topic was getting more and more off-topic. Getting back to the main topic, before this battle, I had never expected that I would ever be suppressed so badly by a melee combatant. My every move was easily predicted, and my last move was instantly countered. I was completely unable to defend against my opponent's attack. If it wasn't for the fact that my armor had astonishing defense, I would have long since lost. If this was a simple duel of martial arts, I would have lost countless times already. Although warrior monks were indeed known as the most talented melee combatant job class, It was far too ridiculous for me to be countered so badly. Since I couldn't understand why, I decided to ask my opponent. Of course, she refused at the very beginning. She probably felt that I just surrendered, so I couldn't immediately do whatever you said. Wouldn't that be the same as making herself look bad? And so, I showed her how I modified Harloise and told her that slimes were no longer able to satisfy me, and that she could choose to be a snail or an earthworm. And so, she obediently agreed. Your swordsmanship? Not bad at all. I'm not trying to be sarcastic here. You probably learned your basics from the ancient court faction. Every single one of your sword attacks is excellent. Plus, you have excellent combat instincts and talent. It wouldn't be wrong to say that you're a swordsmanship genius that only appears once every century. Yep, you're quite excellent among humans. Alright then, her last few words negated everything. Yes, you were quite excellent, but only among humans. She was a swordsmanship genius that only appears once every century, but sorry, that was still only within the human category. I didn't get angry out of embarrassment. I simply listened in silence because this was reality. Since the Snake Archduchess was capable of beating me to the point where I didn't know which way was north, I just listened to what she had to say. Besides, based on my experience, it was always best to listen to the experts when it came to swordsmanship. Experts' harsh words were usually good advice. Yes, you're quite excellent among humans, but you should be able to tell from your fight against me that your swordsmanship is still focused on the situation where your opponent is human. At most, you'll be 3 to 4 meters tall. Your swordsmanship lacks imagination and flexibility, so I can easily predict your next attack. In fact, I can tell just by looking at your eyes and muscle movements that you'll be able to predict your next attack. This was indeed a problem, but how was I supposed to solve it? It wasn't like I could remove all the bones in my body, nor could I change the direction of my joint. Even if I had imagination, I wouldn't be able to use it. Don't look at me with such a doubtful expression. My words are based on facts. Have you ever seen an opponent who suddenly breaks apart and throws their limbs at you like bombs? Have you ever seen an opponent whose entire body is covered in grease and whose fist gets stuck to it? Have you ever seen an opponent whose entire body is indestructible and whose only weakness is the soles of their feet? Do you know why I chose this body type to be so nimble? Back in the day, before I formed my own combat style, not only did I experience countless battlefields, I even challenged thousands of monasteries and fought against thousands of legend-ranked warrior monks. The Snake Archduchess paused for a moment as she suddenly revealed an expression of lingering fear, as if she recalled some painful memory. Actually, I'm not that special. Don't think that my melee combat techniques are already at the peak. In fact, I've lost several dozen times in thousands of fights, and I only managed to escape by sheer luck. One of them even managed to break all of my joints with a single punch. If it wasn't for the fact that I was already a Blood Tribe member at the time, perhaps the best outcome would have been to become a cripple for the rest of my life. As expected, the older the warrior monks, the more powerful they became. The only way to deal with them was to never let them get close to you. Fortunately, it seemed that the warrior monks hadn't lived for very long. I suddenly thought of Omdoroken, whose form as a warrior monk seemed to be an imitation of an opponent that he was unable to defeat. And in the undead plane, battles between the undead are never-ending in order to advance in power level and survive. In the past, at least 3 of my opponents at the same power level were able to easily defeat me, and 2 of the undead emperors were far superior to me in terms of martial arts. Most of them were purely humanoid, but their combat techniques had already reached a level that I was unable to reach. There were even more who could defeat me with their natural talent. I had originally been quite proud of my own sword technique. After all, being able to become a sword saint without much effort was proof of my talent. But now, it seemed that I was still at the level of a human. If this had been 300 years ago, I would have been proud of myself and could have dominated the world, but Considering my future opponents, this is no good at all. My future opponents would only become stronger and stronger. I might even encounter monsters that were thousands or even tens of thousands of years old. No matter how powerful my magic sword was, it would be meaningless if I couldn't hit my opponent. In that case, as an important foundational part of my combat strength system, improving my sword techniques was absolutely necessary. Can't you see it in real combat at your current level? The accumulation of combat experience will eventually bring about changes. Your foundation is quite solid, but it's obvious that you lack actual combat experience. Right, there are also all sorts of ancient sword techniques. They've long since achieved effects that magic can't even achieve with pure sword technique. I recalled the ancient and immemorial sword techniques that my system and justice points could exchange for. Then, I looked at my nearly empty justice points. I recalled that the silly cat and my system had been helping me spend money recently, causing my justice points to dwindle. I originally had enough justice points to buy half a book, but now I only had enough to buy a single page. I almost started crying. I wonder if Bayana will sell a single page to me. Cough, cough, that's too embarrassing. I'll stop thinking about it for now. Since I can't talk about ancient sword techniques for now, I should first use real combat to train myself. Isn't this a rare target right in front of me? Alright then, it was no longer possible for me to become cannon fodder on the battlefield. Mortal battles in the mortal plane were also unable to give me the experience I needed. It was rare for me to meet an opponent like Alexandra, so I limited her physical strength to the gold rank and forbade her from using any killing move. Then, I reduced her speed and overall difficulty so that I could continue training. Even so, I was still beaten up quite badly at first. But later, I discovered that the dream log was able to recover my stamina and injuries just like on the battlefield. It was the Snake Archduchess's so-called medicine. And so, after more than 100 battles, the situation changed. Fine then, it didn't change at all. How could it be so easy to improve? Although I was still the one getting beaten up, at least I was able to last slightly longer. Unfortunately, the Snake Archduchess was currently lying on the ground, pretending to be dead and refusing to get up no matter what. Alright, I'll let you go today. It'd be such a waste if you die in one go. Don't even think about running away. Countless eyes are watching you. How about I turn you into a mouse? You'll be a perfect match for Harloise. Let me give you a warning. If you intend to turn her into a mouse, you'd better tell Bayfong. He recently brought back a nest of whitehair stinger rat. Alright, I will. Who's Bayfong? The ignorant undead lord even asked out of curiosity. Gleena had an evil smile on her face as she directly gave her a book. The Snake Archduchess then flipped through a few pages and immediately stood up. Lord Roland, I've suddenly realized something. Let's continue training. While I sighed at how a certain undead lord was trembling slightly, I couldn't help but come up with an idea. How about I turn any captives that refuse to surrender into animals and feed them to Bayfong in the future? That's so inhumane. That's so cruel and inhumane. Lord Roland, please reconsider. Just doing such an evil deed will cause you to be treated as an evil villain. Boss, I object. I, Bayfong, am not a casual person. Yep, you're not a human at all. Chapter 394. The advantage of choosing a secluded manor with its own entrance and courtyard was that I could build it as I pleased without the neighbors complaining that I was disturbing them in the middle of the night. Cough, I meant that I could slightly strengthen my military facilities and training without being noticed. According to my agreement with Orlos, in order to participate in the upcoming events, I indeed needed to reorganize my subordinate strength. Being a peerless general sounded great, but it was actually just another way of saying that I was a commander without an army. In consideration of future high-intensity battles, coupled with the increasingly troublesome current situation, it was indeed time to reorganize the Mist Flag's combat strength. Yep, the mist flag was the mist from Roland Mist. It wasn't the Donlon royal family that Renee was in. It was my, Roland's, personal force, or perhaps, my family. If we put all our allied forces together, their combat strength would be quite impressive. However, many of them belonged to certain countries or alliances, but not many of them could be completely under my name. My 7 deadly sins, lust was still sleeping, pride was disobedient, and sloth wasn't even born yet. My red hunting hounds, many of whom were working in Donlon, while most of them were still messing around in the underground. And then there were my retainers, such as my personal advisor Timlad, Olivia, and her group of engineers and alchemists, the merchant guild that Elisa had left behind as a gift, the great Drool Eaglestorm, and the dark elves Diana, Yon, Momo, and Victoria, who were no longer restricted by their duties. Yep, and wait. Why do I have to wait when it's my turn? A certain Draken complained. Isn't it because you're becoming more and more associated with the word harmony? Sooner or later, you'll be able to summon the holy light of harmony just by using your name. With my status as the God of Law's divine envoy and my past relationships, I could indeed command Shueti, Lilith, and the other law job classes. However, strictly speaking, they weren't under my control. They were loyal to the Church of Law, and as law enforcers and judges, they should indeed remain neutral. With my identity as the last descendant of the Mist, I can indeed command Donglon's Aurora Knight and Sluir's Royal Knight. But strictly speaking, before these warriors, there are still the 2 empresses, Renee and Gleena. It isn't suitable for me to command them frequently and directly. Actually, every time before I made a move, I would have Renee and Gleena personally lead the team. This was not only a way for the young kings to gain experience, but also a way to show respect to the royal authority. Of course, as the Mist Alliance was established, as a core member of the Mist Alliance, I would have more and more hidden subordinates under my command. However, it was possible that my direct combat strength would decrease as well. Normally, I didn't have many subordinates under my command. If I wanted to start a war or deal with a war, I could only rely on my personal charisma. This wasn't my personal situation, but rather a common problem in this generation. Even if I didn't want to admit it, the basic foundation of humanity in the world of Aichi was still nobles and knight-knight. The harsh environment caused the weak humans to learn to band together for warmth. Nobles ruled over their citizens, and they also had the responsibility of protecting their citizens. Meanwhile, countless domain lords pledged their loyalty to the royal authority, and together, they formed a kingdom or empire. Of course, there were also countries with a parliamentary system and a republic system. However, these countries were either small in size, such as a single city and a single country, or they had special situations, such as a unified theocracy or a mixture of different ethnic groups. However, the dominant system was always the feudal system of feudal lords, who were considered reactionaries in the olden days. I didn't try to start a bourgeois or proletarian revolution like how transmigrators often appeared in novels. That was because such a social system and concept suited the current reality of society. Forcing an advanced system that didn't fit the current reality would only cause the wheels of history to roll past me. The weak would serve the strong, and the strong would protect the weak. When harsh living conditions required such a direct rule of survival, the nobles who possessed power would naturally always exist. Those who weren't originally nobles would also become nobles or feudal lords after obtaining power. And in the current feudal era, even the king of a country would only be the largest domain lord in that country. His power came more from his authority. In reality, the only direct subordinates he had were his family's territory and the knight who was loyal to that family. Yep, the royal knight. In most situations, a royal knight was a personal knight who was loyal to the royal family. However, since the royal family was the ruler of the country, there was no difference between being loyal to the royal family and being loyal to the royal family. Alright, now that I've said so much, I can see that the countries in this world were completely different from the modern countries on Earth. From a certain point of view, the countries in H's world were made up of countless families. The knight's loyalty was usually to that family, not to the so-called country. In fact, it could even be said that there wasn't a pure concept of a country. And the composition of this family wasn't purely based on bloodline. It was also possible to have a common ideal or a common goal. In order to resist the tyranny and genocide of the Lav Empire, countless races and people hid and moved to the Shimmering Mountains. When they really drove out the Lav Empire, a family with the emblem of White Eagle became the master of that mountain range. And the descendants of those survivors became a new race, the Tanyan people, and they were the descendants of Eagle. Completely different from this was the Farron family. They were a group of scholars who specialized in the study of ancient arcana and astronomy. They conducted research under the guidance of a peerless genius named Farron. After a long period of time, they intermarried with each other, becoming a legendary family with generations of astrological archmages. A country was a combination of families. A local knight would be loyal to the local domain lord, the local domain lord would be loyal to the royal family, and all idle knight would be loyal to the royal family. The destruction of a country would usually be the destruction of the royal family of that country. That was why the destruction of a country's royal family was sometimes even more dangerous than an invasion by foreign enemies. That's why I can say that as long as I'm alive, the Mist Kingdom isn't destroyed. And the loyal royal knight and warriors of the Mist Kingdom are currently following me as undead. In that case, in the eyes of the public, does that mean that our Northland's Mist family isn't destroyed as well? This I really don't know. Why don't we ask Cavendish about it? From a certain standpoint, there really was no precedent for what happened between the two of us. Indeed, there was no precedent for someone dying and then coming back to life and going to hell. However, René's Donlon royal family, the Mist family, and Sluir's royal family could only be viewed as a branch of the original Northland's Mist family. This was something that their founder had admitted when he raised his flag. If I directly admitted that René and Glena were members of the Northland's Mist family, it was likely that the two of them would have to be placed under me. Not only would I, as the original owner of this land, have a difficult time interacting with the two princesses in the future, it might even cause a war between my descendants over the legitimacy of the Northland's Mist family. This was something that I obviously didn't want to see. And no matter what happened in the past, now that I was walking the world as Roland Mist, it was only natural that the Northland's Mist family still existed. At the very least, it could be seen as the Northland's Mist family's revival. Bastion and the others had already privately complained to me several times. They hoped that I would be able to raise the Mist family's flag again. Even if the country was destroyed, the family would still exist. They hoped that I would be able to raise the Mist family's flag and revive the Northland's Mist family. On a different level, this was indeed a necessity after the Mist Alliance was established. I anticipated that the Mist Alliance would be a parliamentary alliance of countries. However, only the royalty of each country would be able to become a member of the Mist Alliance. Since I was participating in the Mist Alliance under my personal name, it was obviously inappropriate for me to do so. Alright then, to be honest, what I found the most intolerable was that I never expected that these old skeletons and zombies would be so bored as to try and force me into a marriage. Your Highness, you're already more than 300 years old, and the king next door already has 5 generations of grandchildren. Yet you're still an old bachelor? I've let down the previous king's teachings. Who's an old bachelor? What does it have to do with my father whether or not I have a woman? I already have a girlfriend. Eliza, a demon lord, a flame sea marchioness. She's super strong, aren't you afraid? So what if she's a semi-god and a demon lord? The Mist family wants a female master, not a hired thug. Even a demon marchioness can't have children, so why should I be afraid? Your Highness, please think about it. If you die, who will we old fellows be loyal to? The Mist family's 2,000 years of inheritance can't be lost in our generation. Miss Eliza can indeed be a mistress, but the Mist family needs a female master who can have children. I was quite angry that someone was forcing me to get married in front of everyone. But from a certain standpoint, old Sir Ferdinand, who had been loyal to the Mist family for generations and was my elder, could indeed act as my father. I couldn't even vent my anger. But if that was all there was to it, I could still accept it. Previously, I didn't have many living subordinates under my command. But now that Tim Ladd and the others had joined the Mist family, I had more and more living subordinates under my command. This made some things more troublesome. Your Highness, even the long-term mercenaries working for major merchants are loyal to the merchant family. You have more and more subordinates. Even if you don't care about yourself, you still need to think about them. At the very least, they'll have a place to pay their pensions if they die, and their families will be able to take care of them when they're old. That's where you'll have nothing to worry about. Yes, Your Highness. You should at least think about your subordinates and give them a chance to become nobles. Even if the powerful individuals don't care about such things, do you think those low-level warriors and youths wouldn't care? Even those dark elves would want a stable family. Ever since we returned to the Northlands and were able to walk under the sun, these Night Orlos kept nagging me. I could understand how they felt. They had returned to their homeland, but everything had changed. They hoped that the Mist family could be revived and that the family they were loyal to would be able to continue. But in the end, a certain someone's words made me decide to rebuild the Mist family. Actually, I think that Her Highness Renee would be a great choice as the future female master of the Mist family. It's perfectly fine for her to split from the Mist family and return to the original Mist family. Even the palace can be returned to the original one. That would be perfect. I wasn't talking about that. I threw this bastard out of a window on the 3rd floor. Later, I found out that he had received benefits from Renee. Then, I punished Renee by swinging her sword 1,000 times. Your Highness, even if it's for our own good, with the Mist family, we can even adopt a son to inherit our martial arts and honor. This way, our family won't be cut off, and our family will have a meaning of passing on. As far as the eye could see, it wasn't just 1 or 2 undead Night Orlos Knight whose soulfire was filled with hope. Instead, it was all the undead Night Orlos. Being accepted by a living person and being able to adopt a son to continue their family was a beautiful dream that the Mist Kingdom's royal Night Orlos family didn't even dare to dream about. Now that they were only one step away from their dream, how could these royal Night Orlos family, who valued honor and inheritance, endure it? You can just adopt a son to rebuild your family. It won't affect me. Your Highness, who will the new family be loyal to? Our adopted son and his descendants will be loyal to their descendant. All right then, from a certain standpoint, this was just like how the commoners wouldn't dare to light up their lamps if the officials didn't set them on fire. Something seemed off about this. Even if it was only for the sake of the loyal Night Orlos family members who had followed me for so long, it was necessary to rebuild the Mist family. After all, it was only a change of name, and it wouldn't affect me from doing what I wanted to do. In the end, I agreed. But, just the announcement of this news caused both the living and the dead to become more enthusiastic about their work by at least 50%. I couldn't help but sigh. As expected, this was still a feudal society where traditional values were deeply ingrained. It would seem that while it's important to have a common goal, we do indeed need a long-term meal ticket as a material guarantee, and right now, for the sake of the great trouble that was about to begin, the strength I gathered was the entirety of the new Mist family. Chapter 395. When are we going to retrieve the god equipment of the elements? His high elf form didn't have the elegance unique to his species. The storms around him made his anxiety obvious. As time passed, the wind elemental god Camdron's patience was wearing thin. When are we going to Dragon World? The elders are all waiting. You should have finished reading the information already. This time, it wasn't the always smiling copper dragon that came to rush me. The cold blue dragon Evelyn surprised everyone. Your Highness, when are we going to repair the earth elemental throne? The great stone sculptor was also quite anxious. From a certain standpoint, she had been in a state of excitement ever since she learned that she was the top candidate for the earth elemental throne. Just wait. How are we supposed to fight the boss if we don't have enough people? That's right, I wasn't going to sacrifice myself for the Snake Archduchess and the other two. Since I already knew how ridiculously powerful the enemies we were going to be facing would be, how could I possibly start an expedition to another world when I didn't have enough combat strength? Perhaps this is the true test of the Holy War. This time, I had put in a lot of effort. Judging from the combat strength I had gathered, I had sent out my full strength. There were indeed many people here, but after reorganizing them, I divided them into three main groups. The first group was the former Mist Kingdom's Royal Knight, the Undying Undead Warriors. There were nearly 25,000 of them, and they were my most trusted knight. They were also the strongest existences, and quite a few of them had reached Valkyrie's power level. They would forever be my strongest trump card. Due to the trouble of being undead, only about 2,000 of them were active on the surface. They were all involved in the Mist Alliance's construction. Some of them were serving as instructors and team leaders for the various combat squads in Donglan, while others were active in the undead kingdom of Shilu. They were currently attempting to rebuild the Yongye army. Of course, unlike the chaotic alliance of undead lords, this army was my personal army. Their battle flag was the traditional Mist War flag. That was a remnant of the past, as well as a symbol of the glory of inheritance. When they made up their minds to wave their swords, when this old war flag once again flew in the air, the Undying who were unwilling to die here would use blood and fire to remind them of what it meant to be a warrior's glory and an undying knight. Although this was my strongest trump card, it was also the most inconvenient to use. Just summoning them would cause countless countries to be highly vigilant. That was why I could only have most of my members train their combat techniques in the underground world. But recently they had an additional responsibility, to train the newcomers. Not only would they inherit combat techniques and abilities, but they would also inherit honor and inheritance. This time, I had gathered a total of 6,000 undead knights through the Mizar and the recently completed Greedy Wolf Airship No. 1. I had also relied on Barty's reputation and guarantee to have these two magic bone airships surrounded by black mist pass by various countries. If the Red Hunting Hounds were the most inconvenient but most trustworthy force in my arsenal, then the combat strength below me was probably the most convenient but least trustworthy force in my arsenal. Oh my, why are there 2 eggs and a chicken drumstick for lunch today? Don't you know? To celebrate the official establishment of the Northland's Mist family, there's going to be an extra meal for lunch and an extra bottle of ale for dinner. Has His Highness Roland finally made up his mind? Wait a moment, isn't this a super joyous occasion? A celebratory banquet and revival ceremony? Our boss is a living legend. As long as he says the word, all the mega empires will probably send people over, right? Could it be that the official celebration has been delayed? Normally speaking, a family's revival and establishment would be the most important event. Inviting guests would be quite simple, but it would be quite common for a family to celebrate for an entire year and spend all the taxes they had earned from their territories for the past 3 years. This wasn't just for the sake of reputation, but also to show off the family's connections and foundational power. No, having an extra meal for lunch is already a celebration. His Highness Roland said that he's been busy recently and that his career is more important, so he wants to skip the formalities. Is that enough? Why do I feel like he thinks it's too troublesome? I think so as well. He's our boss, after all, so he's different from the rest. However, there are some things that he doesn't skip. You know the fifth son of the Eston family, right? That crippled fifth son? Didn't he retire to the second line after he lost his leg in the Northland's Beastmen War? His second son also died in that meat grinder battle. How pitiful. His Highness Roland made him a knight. At the very least, he won't have to worry about starving to death for the rest of his life. We're so lucky. His Highness Roland is starting to confer knight titles? That's wonderful. Do we have hope? Forget it, we're just bronze-ranked warriors. It won't be our turn no matter what. Just pretend I didn't say anything. According to the rules of Ike, the lowest rank that could be conferred as a knight title would be at least silver rank. This was something that ordinary people wouldn't be able to achieve even if they worked hard for their entire lives. His Highness Roland is different from others. He doesn't care much about power levels. Instead, he cares about achievements. The first batch has 30 people. Our mercenary group has 16 people. All of them have first-class achievements. The ones who self-destructed in the Titan Mecha are all here. We only have a third-class achievement each. Don't count on us this time. But at least there's hope. Fifth son is so good. Even if he can't go to the battlefield in the future, just this title alone will be enough for him to eat for the rest of his life. Don't look down on the crippled fifth son. If he wasn't as ruthless as you, how could he have received the Blood Knight medal? That old fellow has been nagging those goblins in the Magic Research Institute's mechanical division every day. He's forcing them to take out artificial limbs with cannons. That old fellow doesn't plan on being a knight to the end. He wants his own son to become a knight. The lowest rank of knight viscounts didn't have the right to inherit their titles. Only barons could inherit their titles. However, if they didn't have any military achievements, their title would be demoted. That was why, generally speaking, barons were the true nobility that was recognized by the public. A small knight title, even if they were lucky enough to obtain a piece of land, would at most be a village with 30 to 50 households. Perhaps this wasn't worth mentioning to strong people. However, for mercenaries who fought on the battlefield, it was a lifelong dream. That's right, mercenaries. Mercenaries from the Super Mercenary Group, the Absolute Gentleman Alliance. Although I wanted to talk to them about shared ideals and the beautiful dream of saving the world, as well as the impending long night, for them, ideals were nothing more than the extravagant wishes of nobles who didn't have to worry about their stomachs. Only a stable income and the opportunity to become a noble would be their lifelong dream. As for Armageddon, if they didn't have enough to eat or were fatally injured, or if they were disabled and didn't have enough money saved up for retirement, every day would be Armageddon. Mercenaries aren't trustworthy. This was the common opinion of mercenaries in every country about mercenaries who worked for money. And in most situations, they weren't wrong at all. As mercenaries who fought for money, they naturally had to think about their own futures. If they fought to the death or became disabled, their savings wouldn't even be enough for the rest of their lives. And as a warrior on the battlefield, it was absolutely necessary to lack the will to fight. When an ace knight squadron was able to hold on for 70% of the time, these mercenaries who worked for money would collapse at 10% of the time. If they relied too much on mercenaries, it would become a weakness of their army. No matter how strong their combat strength is, it's impossible to trust or have high hopes for them. And since mercenaries worked for money, if the enemy offered a higher price, there were plenty of examples of entire mercenary groups betraying each other. It was even easier for individual mercenary groups to betray or be bribed. That was why for large-scale battles, even if these mercenary groups obtained permission to participate, they would only serve as cannon fodder. This was what mercenaries were. Vultures on the battlefield who fought for benefits. They weren't bound by the knight's creed, and were more practical than anything else. But as long as they were given enough food, they would become vicious lions. Ordinary mercenary groups wouldn't accept battlefield missions that had a high death rate. However, there were also some battlefield mercenary groups that would choose to roam the cliffs even if they were cannon fodder. Apart from the fact that these battlefield missions offered incredibly high rewards, it was even more likely that they would be taken over by a major noble if they were recognized. If they became a major noble's private army, the mercenary group's higher-ups would have the opportunity to become nobles, and the ordinary warriors would also become regular soldiers. At the very least, they would have military pay and pension in case they were disabled or died in battle. However, the Absolute Gentleman Mercenary Alliance was slightly different from ordinary mercenary groups. The tree planted intentionally wouldn't grow, but the willow planted unintentionally would grow. This mercenary group, that had been created as a joke, had actually become stronger and stronger in recent years. The mercenary group's leader was me, and they could be called my personal soldiers. Their fighting spirit and loyalty far surpassed that of ordinary private soldiers. As the Absolute Gentleman Mercenary Alliance expanded their range of operations, with the support of the Northlands countries, their mercenary group now had offices in more than 30 countries. In fact, they even had 17 large-scale mercenary groups in each country. Their total number of registered mercenaries now exceeded 300,000. More than 70% of the mercenaries were from Donglan or Slowir. It could be said that more than 80% of the members were people of the mist. They were willing to join this mercenary group not only because this mercenary group had excellent treatment and reputation, but also because they trusted me as the leader of this mercenary group. They believed that I would give them a bright future. In the past battles, they had indeed performed quite well. No matter if it was the bloody battles against the beastmen in the Northlands or the continuous battles in the South, they had always displayed sufficient loyalty and ability. But as mercenaries, they naturally had their own expectations. They hoped that they would have a bright future, rich rewards, and a chance to return home in glory. Of course, these mega-large-scale mercenary groups were also divided into different levels. Those on the outside only needed ability and a clean reputation, but after a certain level of development, the core combat groups would always be the core. As for the warriors who had displayed sufficient ability and loyalty in the past, the mercenary group would sign long-term contracts with them for 20, 30, or even 50 years. If they broke the contract, they would no longer need to work as a mercenary. They would basically never need to think about jumping around in the future. And while they received rewards and protection, they would also repay the responsibilities and requirements of the long-term contract. Actually, these mercenaries who had signed long-term contracts known as lifetime contracts didn't even consider themselves to be mercenaries in their words or actions. We're all warriors of His Highness Roland. It's just that it's not convenient for us to form a combat group right now. No matter what, we're all warriors of His Highness. There are some things that we need to pay attention to. At the very least, we can't stain that battle flag. And now, the conferment of knight titles and the raising of the Mist family's flag seemed to prove this saying. And so, countless mercenaries were applying for long-term contracts within the mercenary group. And now, after the news that I had decided to rebuild the Northlands Mist family spread, the number of new applications to join the mercenary group increased by nearly 20,000 in just 3 short days. And when the news that I had conferred 16 knight titles from my mercenary group spread, the number of new applications to join the mercenary group increased by 50,000. From a certain standpoint, since I didn't have a territory, wasn't a king, and wasn't loyal to any domain lord, I couldn't even be considered a pure nobleman. Logically speaking, I also didn't have the right to confer knight titles. However, it seemed that no matter if it was outsiders or my subordinates, all of them ignored this most basic of noble conventions. Of course, I wasn't going to make empty promises. The knight titles that I conferred would be recognized by the various countries in the Northland. And after they achieved enough meritorious deeds to become noblemen, I would think of a way to help them obtain their own territory. Only barons and above would be able to obtain a territory, but usually only counts with military achievements would be able to do so, and the success rate would be extremely low. This time, the Borealis had brought over 5,600 long-term contracts with me. It didn't seem like much, but the fact that they were able to pass through so many tests and sign a long-term contract already proved their abilities and loyalty. Their average power level had reached the astonishing bronze rank. From a certain standpoint, they were indeed my core private troop. Now that the situation had developed to such a degree, perhaps it was also the best evidence of the usefulness of reputation and legitimacy. In the Donglan capital Definder and the Sluir capital Entune, all sorts of rumors of grand chess moves and premeditated plots were spreading all over the street. Even the peddlers on the street corners were saying things like, Prince Roland used the name of a mercenary group to gather the warriors who yearned for the Mist's battle flag, and the royalty of the Northlands and Northlands hated this sort of stealing, but couldn't do anything about it. Not only are there the 4 elemental swordcasters and magic archers among those mercenaries, there's even an Aurora Knight. How could these ace troops possibly be wild? It's so obvious, and they still dare to call themselves mercenaries. Actually, I had only intended to make a joke at the time. In fact, I didn't even manage the development of the mercenary group for a long period of time. Being able to develop to this point, apart from the fact that those mercenaries were truly powerful, perhaps it was purely due to the people of the Mist's trust in that tattered battle flag. He's our prince, and he'll lead us to a better life. Yep, it's because of his arrival that we've had the most comfortable winter in the past 50 years. This year, not a single person froze to death on the streets, and the people who moved to other places have all returned to their homeland. It would be a joke if I said that I was able to attract so many people of the Mist to fight for me just based on my reputation and so-called legitimacy of the Mist family. However, the Northland's Mist family's accumulated honor and trust over the past 2,000 years was my most valuable asset, yet also a heavy burden that made it hard for me to breathe. Not to mention a mercenary group, even if you used your own name and that battle flag to open a circus, it would still be filled with people of the Mist. If you don't believe me, you can ask your undead knight. They've long since reached the level of blind loyalty where they don't ask why, but only what to do. I didn't know how to respond to Harlow's teasing. I knew that she was telling the truth. As for their trust, the only thing I, a fallen prince who couldn't even protect my home, could do to repay them was to think of a way to lead them through this calamity that was akin to Armageddon. Perhaps the future will be difficult, but at least we'll all be together. Perhaps in the eyes of outsiders, they were still nothing more than mercenaries. However, these young people who had given their lives to me were already a part of me. The Absolute Gentleman Alliance's battle flag was a black ball mask. As for what it symbolized, there were countless theories on the market. But at the time, I had only used this flag because I wanted to remind those bastards who had already become the core members of my mercenary group. Remember to wear a mask when you're doing something bad. I don't want to go to the police station to take someone away. As for things like gazing at the light in the darkness, a person who's resolved himself to lose everything, a night ranger who doesn't need a face, and so on, those were obviously just exaggerated explanations. Apart from the Red Hunting Hounds and the Absolute Gentleman Alliance, the third largest organization was the Magic Engineering Research Institute and the Schindler Merchant Group, which were also known as the Magic Research Institute. They were already at the forefront of the new generation. Not only were they the dawn of the new generation, they were also the logistics department of the Mist faction that was gradually becoming more united. Not only were they researchers, but they also had the 4 elemental swordcasters, magic archers, great engineers, and great alchemists. The Borealis, Avarice, and Mizar were 3 super battleships, as well as 6 medium-sized battleships and 3-digit small battleships. They had a total combat strength of 13,000 people, 67 great engineers who were at least gold rank, 427 engineering and alchemy experts, and countless war machines. This was more than enough to start a small-scale war on the scale of a small country. Of course, after investing so much, I hoped to obtain even more, so much more that even I felt like I was being too greedy. I think that if those dragons know what you're planning, they'll definitely think of a way to kill you. Since you're after their most precious treasure, wouldn't they be opening the door to a thief? I think so as well. But by the time they find out, I should have already achieved my goal. Besides, it would be a waste to give them a treasure of this level, so I might as well make the best use of it. After all, winter's coming? I shook my head. If it was winter, then it sounded like spring wasn't far away. But when I looked at my timeline, I couldn't see any signs of spring's arrival, and I didn't have much time left. If I really had to describe it, I would probably say that the apocalypse is coming. Still, it's already so much better than in the game's history. At the very least, we still have hope this time, as long as my plan can be realized. Then, how confident are you in your plan? I really want to say 100%, but unfortunately, even 10% is too much. But at least it's not completely hopeless. I looked out the window at the trees that had just sprouted. This seemed like a rare good omen. Yeah, at least it's not completely hopeless. And this time, our goal is to create our own hope so that our future days will be easier. Even if it means destroying other people's hope. Of course. Chapter 396. About Cher's Treatment Plan, 3rd edition. I had carefully written out my treatment plan in a thick booklet. Plan 1. Transfer her soul and create a new physical body to transfer her soul to. The advantage of this plan is that it's easy to operate. I can create a perfect physical body in a short period of time. If it's just a pure soul transfer, there's basically no chance of any mistakes with my technology. The disadvantage is that it's an undead creation, so it's definitely not as useful as a physical body. Don't even think about having children, but I can perfectly duplicate food and normal male and female entertainment. Back then, I sealed a portion of my soul's essence into it. This time, it's impossible to create such a useful miraculous creation. P.S. Since the 7 original sins are related to the mysteries of soul searching, I can't be sure if the new physical body will inherit the original problem. That's why this plan still needs to be perfected. Plan 2. Refine her soul and remove the lust part of her soul, turning her into an idiot with no love cells. That way, she'll never fall in love with anyone else. Naturally, she won't activate this system. Strongly recommended. The advantage of this plan is that it's simple, direct, and one-step. A perfect soul surgery will completely solve the seasonal problem of love. But the disadvantage is that even though soul surgery is more complete, if you're unlucky, it's quite normal for your soul to become unstable and your soul to split, resulting in multiple personalities. Strongly recommended note. This plan is the best way to preserve this perfect circulation system. When my technology improves, all the problems will naturally be solved. Yep, I should say that preserving the original lust system will be very helpful to my personal research. I should be able to make a breakthrough soon. And it's even possible for you to obtain new sisters. When I presented these 2 plans to Evelyn, I fully hoped that she would choose the latter. That was because no matter how I looked at it, the latter would be the best for us. Not only that, it would help her get rid of the chronic problem of love. This was such a powerful treatment plan. Permanently stripping away the most basic sin from the soul, this is a miracle that only I, a genius in soul surgery, can achieve. What? The side effect of having multiple personalities? What kind of side effect would that be? Having multiple personalities would bring about many different talents and abilities. This was a free gift. Didn't you see how powerful Evelyn was right now? She had 10 personalities and 10 different talents, as expected of one of my very first creations. Yet, this blue dragon only took a glance at the plan before unhesitatingly placing it in front of her. She then sniffed, suck. Alright, it didn't snot spurt out. It seemed like this female dragon loved cleanliness. Who? However, I didn't have the time to save him. This time, instead of inhaling, he spat out lightning. Thus, the treatment plan that I had worked so hard on was destroyed. You guys are too much. It took me 2 whole days, 20 minutes. Bring out your third plan. Aren't you just waiting for us to reject these 2 plans so that the third plan can be passed quickly? Don't look at me so strangely. We know very well how awkward you are. Don't you love a truly perfect scheme, making your opponent believe that the situation before him is his best choice? All I have to do is create an environment where he has no choice but to choose according to my expectations. Alright, this sentence does seem to be my tone. It's extremely awkward. Although I would have to bring out my third plan sooner or later, it was still quite displeasing to be seen through by others. I pouted, but still brought it out. Since I had already come up with a plan, I naturally had to bring it out. Third plan. Give her physical psychotherapy to help her understand that love is a purely neurological disease. Yep, it's basically a mental illness. Children in puberty will spend a lot of time and energy on it, but they'll get nothing out of it. That's why we need to guide her and have her read more books and exercise more, so that she can focus most of her energy on her studies and career, such as fighting for the betterment of humanity. We need to delay the time when she starts having a mental illness. Usually, she won't have a mental illness after puberty, but if she still enters estrus, we'll directly freeze her for a long period of time. Blue Dragon Evelyn chuckled. And then, there was no then. Hey, why did you swallow it? I had a really hard time writing it. Fourth plan? No. Fine, here it is. This book was rather thin, with only 1 page, so I directly read it out loud. This is addiction, this is electronic heroin. So-called love is nothing but an illusion. She needs electrotherapy. She needs more electric shocks and electric chairs. I think that you're the one who needs electrotherapy. Treat your hopeless head in the lightning. A powerful thunderstorm covered the entire sky. Although it wouldn't be fatal, it would be impossible for me to escape from being charred black. The most annoying part was that all my hair was standing on end due to the electric reaction. A golden mohawk? Isn't this a rural, non-mainstream hairstyle? You're going too far. I'm going to fight you to the death. I finally understood why blue dragons were so annoying. They were far too hot-tempered. I was just joking because the atmosphere was too tense. You don't have any sense of humor at all. If you can't take a joke, you should have said so earlier. Nobody can take your jokes, right? Let me say this first. If you want to do experiments, go find your new favorite. Don't use me. I ignored the silly cat's complaints and angrily took out a new backup plan from my backpack. Backup plans? 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 Plan 4. Through hypnosis and books, we can slowly change her sexual orientation and make her fall in love with a female. Then, we'll see if this will trigger a trap. If it doesn't, we'll have plenty of time to observe. Asterisk rip. Asterisk alright then, next. Plan 5. Brainwash her or give her a permanent mental retardation spell. As long as her intelligence falls to the level of an infant. Fine, fine, stop scolding me. Plan 6. Plan 13. Modify her physical body and reconstruct her reproductive organs so that she becomes him. Will he still fall in love with the opposite sex? Yep, this is a topic worthy of our research. Cough, I got it. I'll give up on Plan 13. Plan 14. We can use a forbidden spell to seal her away forever, or we can ask Amelia to cast a Sleeping Beauty curse on her. What? She's still not satisfied with this? What a difficult customer to serve. Fine, fine, Plan 15. Plan 27. We can go find Beifong. Fine, don't do anything. It's all my fault for using Beifong first, so I'll cancel this plan. We were currently in a gigantic underground cave that was so large that we couldn't even see the top of our heads. While I was chatting with Evelyn, a long army was marching behind us. Countless craftsmen and warriors were slowly moving forward with their luggage and carts. Their destination was a dimensional portal in front of us, the entrance to Dragon World. Fortunately, this was a portal to Dragon World. If all dragons, including the immemorial dragons, could freely go out, this portal would have long since been large enough to accommodate airship. Right now I was chatting with Evelyn, the elder responsible for guarding the dragons here. But right now I was only chatting with the copper dragon and blue dragon that I was rather familiar with. So many boring plans. Have you been very free lately? No, I've been super busy recently, so I've been making plans to adjust my schedule. Work and rest should be balanced, you know. Why are you scolding me again? Do you think Blue Dragon can be so unreasonable? You actually treat Cher and my treatment as entertainment? Shouldn't you be taught a lesson for having such an attitude? The Blue Dragon said this expressionlessly. But no matter how I looked at it, it seemed like she was just trying to find an excuse to mess with me. Could it be that I had offended her in some way? Perhaps you've offended her in too many ways. Not only did you offend her in the past, even now, any normal person would think that you're obviously making trouble out of malice upon seeing these plans. But I'm being serious. That's even worse. She's hopeless. No, Cher can still be saved. We can't give up on treatment. I'm saying that your brain is hopeless. You should stop struggling and give up on treatment. Alright then, what followed next was the usual mancat blitz. Pfft, Roland, you've truly changed. Copper Dragon Evelyn, who had been calmly drinking tea and chatting, sighed when she saw this farce. I've become more handsome? It's probably because of my many years on the battlefield that I've become more manly. I don't know if I've become more handsome, but I've definitely become cuter. Princess Peach's picture album has been selling really well recently. I bought one as well, and all my sisters are fighting over it. They all say it's so cute. Harloise, remember to remind me to throw that bastard into the Mizar's airship cannons. Yep, I mean that blasphemous creature with 2 legs and a tail. I agree, but will the airship cannons be enough? I think we should use the Borealis main cannons instead. Cleaning the cannons will be so troublesome. Since we had nothing better to do, we chatted here. However, someone couldn't bear to watch this any longer. Back then, you had such a lonely expression. You looked like you were smiling, but you actually felt like you were crying. You were filled with hatred towards the entire world, just like a man who had been betrayed by the entire world. To everyone's astonishment, Blue Dragon Evelyn finally spoke up. Although she still had a serious expression as she spoke, her eyes flashed with the color of memories. Suddenly, those memories transformed into joy as the frost on her face instantly thawed. You were so cool. An avenger who treated the entire world as his enemy. Her delighted expression made her seem as if she was a young girl who chased after her favorite celebrity. Image, fifth sister, your image of an icy beauty has been completely destroyed. We all silently nodded in response to Copper Dragon Evelyn's comment. Her image of an icy beauty was completely gone. She's so logical that I actually have nothing to say. The silly cat's comments were getting better and better. It would seem that I was indeed well trained. But suddenly, Blue Dragon Evelyn suddenly glared at me, and then, Tui. Blue Dragon Evelyn spat on the ground in disdain as she turned to look at me with a look of disdain. I was still rather nervous to be stared at by a beauty like this. If you were the handsome prince of revenge from a legendary story, now you're nothing more than a comical idiot. She's so logical. I actually have nothing to say. The black cat on my shoulder pretended to be astonished. All right then, silly cat, there's no need to comment anymore. Why are you nodding so vigorously? Don't think that I didn't notice that you changed the exclamation mark. Do you really agree so much? If I'm a professional comedian, then aren't you a professional comedian? So we've always been a classic crosstalk duo? If you want to be a comedian, go ahead. Don't drag me into this. I'm not the same as you. Humph, such a professional comment, and you still dare to say that you're not a comedian? Harloise, the genes for being a comedian have already been buried in your bones. You were born to be a comedic cat. All right then, the second battle between a cat and a human began. However, the Evelyns exchanged glances and began to secretly laugh. They were sent to communicate with Roland because they were the sisters who were more attached to the past. Now that they saw the current Roland, they realized many things and began to communicate spiritually with each other. Fifth sister, compared to the seemingly cold but actually kind fellow in my memories, I hate the hidden melancholy and anger in his eyes. I like the guy in front of me more. Of course you like him. Haven't you always enjoyed watching comedies? But Roland was indeed like this, which was reassuring. A message from second sister? The two of them silently read the message. In the end, it was Copper Dragon Evelyn who spoke up first. Roland, why do I feel like you're intentionally keeping us busy so that we won't check if the goods you brought into Dragon World contain anything illegal? I feel like you're insulting our intelligence. We're not those customs officials who can be easily fooled. All right then, it seemed that it wouldn't be so easy to fool them. And so, as I handed over the real treatment plan, I smiled and asked, "What level of goods do you think are considered illegal for powerful dragons?" Heh, did you really think that I would bring something like a Salos crystal with me? I still want to live for a few more years. Before I could finish my explanation, the two dragon race members exclaimed in unison in the next moment. You really brought a Salos crystal? No, I was just giving an example. Just an example. Second sister is right. He's actually seriously explaining himself, which means that he's feeling guilty. He definitely brought a Salos crystal with him. Why would you casually bring such a powerful weapon with you? Are you intending to start a world war? All right then, it seemed that I wouldn't be able to hide it from them anymore. But just as I was hesitating whether to force my way through, or confess and be sent to prison, something seemed wrong. Cough, at this critical moment, the two female dragons smiled at each other and focused their attention on the treatment plan in their hand. It seems that we've been let off the hook. Like I said, you could have just brought the Salos crystal with you. Why did you have to play such tricks? Others are probably looking down on you now. Would you really allow someone to bring a nuclear bomb that could alter the continental shelf at any moment into your home? That's a matter of principle. How could I have known that they'd be so open-minded and have no standpoint? I couldn't help but mutter to myself as I watched my old friends, who were intentionally discussing the treatment plan and pretending to know nothing. Perhaps it's not that they have no principles or standpoint, it's that their standpoint isn't what I originally knew. Chapter 397. Looks like Senior was right. I didn't expect the moon to be so big and round overseas. The air is so fresh. It's no wonder I worked so hard to get an immigrant green card. However, my sigh didn't receive any response. It seems that being in a different world isn't good. No one understood this cold joke. What era is it? Why are you still using this joke? Don't you think you've exposed your age enough? System notification, reward, 5 justice points. Thank you. Alright, at least there's someone paying attention to me. There's no awkward silence. However, what I said was indeed correct. The moment I passed through the dimensional door, the most intuitive feeling I got from this world was the beautiful light blue starry sky, as well as the moon that seemed to be right above my head, giving me tremendous pressure. What big round moons, there are actually 3 of them. The blood-red moon was surrounded by a blood-red magic storm, and it was surrounded by a red satellite with an ominous tail flame. The pale red moonlight seemed to have magic power, and just looking at it would make people feel irritated. You're in luck. There are less than 30 days in a year when all 3 months are ready. That was Blood Moon Dimo. He would usually only appear in the last few days of every month. His appearance would cause beast hordes to go crazy, and he would also bring about beast tides and berserk dragon disease. The former can only be considered a small problem for the dragons, but the latter is more fatal. It will make the dragons who are not in good condition fall into madness. Therefore, we will not let the injured dragons and the young dragons be exposed to the moonlight. If they are not treated in time, this kind of madness can often last for nearly half a month. It felt nice to have a commentator by my side. If only she wasn't constantly staring at me curiously. When you were trying to hide something, the copper dragon's endless curiosity was really annoying. Beside the blood-red moon were 2 smaller full moons. One was white and the other was khaki. However, the light they emitted seemed to be overshadowed by the blood-red moon. Holy Moon Wendia. She usually appears right after the blood moon. In the myths of the natives, these are the 2 moon gods who fight each other. When they appear at the same time, it means the beginning of a new month. Since the blood moon still has the advantage, today should be the end of the month, at most 2 days. There are natives here? It seems that the information you gave me is not complete. Forget it, what about that earthy yellow one? Hee, don't you know now? This one? Abo, the moon of the warrior, is said to be the war god that the natives worship. He doesn't have any special abilities, but it's said that if the natives see him, they'll think that it's a good time to start a war. To be able to see both the blood moon and the moon of the warrior at the same time, it seems that some places have already been overturned. I think there must be more than 12 months in your calendar. You even have more than 1 moon. How does this calendar work? Evelyn the Bronze Dragon shrugged, seemingly finding this topic meaningless. I'm not sure how it's calculated. There are 6 moons here, 23 months in a year, 7 seasons, and the number of days in each month is different. Only some scroll dragons have studied it. When it's a particularly important or dangerous time, they'll give a warning. I knew about scroll dragons. Scroll dragons were one of the rare species of dragons. They were also known as museum dragons. They were natural-born collectors and researchers of knowledge. These wise and conservative dragons had good relationships with the saints and mages. It was said that one of the archmages in the Truth Symposium was a scroll dragon's incarnation. However, what I paid more attention to was the wariness in the copper dragon's words. They seemed to be guarding against something. Danger? Is it the same for dragons? Yep. You should have sensed it already. The elemental tide here is incredibly dense. I nodded. The moment I entered here, I felt my entire body lighten up. My senses towards ice, water, death, and other elements had also greatly improved. In fact, I even felt like I could turn rain into ice with a single thought. This was why I said that the air here was so fresh. Unfortunately, nobody commented on it. Silly cat, are you feeling better? Shut up. I'm not a retort slave. Ever since I told her that she was my comedic partner, she sank into a state of self-loathing and didn't respond to any of my joke. I'm the last princess of the Gold Elves, the undying Banshee Queen, and the future undead Emperor. How could I possibly be a comedic character? Absolutely not. I, the Gold Elf Harlois, am absolutely not a comedic character. Alright then, I won't mention it. When a black cat made such a declaration with a serious expression and raised her paw, it was already quite a comical scene. Still, it was quite rare for her to be depressed for so long. It would seem that the comedic character incident had given her quite a big impact. At the very least, no matter how much I tried to tease her on the way here, she didn't respond at all. Even if I tugged on her tail, she still remained silent. Wait a moment, let me quietly meditate. Moonlight's magic. The elemental tide here is insane. Wonderful. The silly cat became lively again. It seemed that she wasn't silent because she was depressed. Rather, she had sunk into a new research frenzy. It was no wonder that she was so excited. This world with such a high elemental density was actually similar to the high magic worlds in night novels. Cultivation and leveling up here would be much easier, and the strong would have fewer restrictions and more powerful abilities. Just this alone made this trip worthwhile. Perhaps this is a preview of the future. Being able to play the closed beta before the official servers open is already a great benefit. The elemental tide in the world of He was constantly increasing. Being able to understand the natural laws of a world with a high elemental tide before others was naturally a rare opportunity. Not to mention, this time, it's no longer a closed beta with the files deleted. We've truly benefited. Behind me was a large army that was currently surveying the army. Engineers were currently collecting environmental data and testing whether or not their equipment could function normally. Warriors were currently testing the effects of the gravity here, which had increased by 1/5 on their bodies. In fact, there were even mages who were summoning fireballs. However, they were shocked by the fireballs that were twice as large as normal. They would be living in this dimension. Of course, many of them would successfully level up, which would naturally give them a head start over everyone else. This was also why I had decided to bring my entire family with me. Since there was such an opportunity, rather than only a few individuals benefiting, it would be better to benefit everyone on my side. Even though the dragons were facing a difficult situation where they had to forcefully fight against the Titans, they were still doing everything they could to protect this world. From a certain perspective, this was proof of the value of this world. I didn't believe the information they provided that they were unwilling to part with this world just because it could increase the growth rate of young dragons. Of course, I wouldn't say such a thing out loud. At the very least, the reality of this world's high elemental tide density was obvious at a glance. It was impossible to hide. At the very least, I had to pretend to trust the dragons. The elemental tide density is indeed high. This is exactly what the information says. You said that some seasons will be dangerous. Does that mean that you aren't the only masters of this world? Although the information didn't mention it, it was to be expected that this world would have other residents. After all, there were so many dragons living here. Dragons were pure carnivores, and they were famous for having large appetite. They would need a large enough territory in order to provide a sufficient amount of meat. Not to mention, all the dragons had their own preferences for territory. There were plenty of dragons within the dragon species that fought each other for territory. Some even became mortal enemies. The blue dragons and copper dragons, who loved dry desert regions, the red dragons and silver dragons, who loved volcanic regions, and the crystal dragons and white dragons, who loved cold regions, were the most typical examples. Of course, this was also related to the natural enmity between the color dragons and metal dragons. Dragons needed to eat meat. That was why, even though the information didn't mention that there were other residents in this world, I felt that not only would there be other residents, there would be quite a few of them. It was highly likely that these dragons had a grudge against dragons. After all, back in the immemorial generation, dragons would hunt as they pleased. Most He creatures didn't have a good impression of these aggressive flying lizards. Longtu definitely wasn't an individual. You can't say that. After all, this world is huge, and we can't occupy it all. For example, some dragons will take advantage of the blood moon to attack lone dragons, forcing them to enter the dragon berserk state. And when the blood moon is up, even we have to obediently stay in our dragon nest. Fortunately, it's only for 2 or 3 days a year. Heh, today is the blood moon. Perhaps one of your dragons will be unlucky. No way. What a coincidence. I raised my head to look at the sky and actually saw a gigantic white dragon being chased by a group of tiger-headed people with wings. The aerial mounts they were riding on were flying dragons with fleshy wings. Since what I said was true, I was attacked by a group of female tiger-headed dragons. Thus, I obediently lowered my head. I think I really should shut up. Chapter 398. The aerial battle in the sky was still ongoing. The Tigerman's tactic of surrounding the white dragon reminded me of a wolf pack surrounding a large buffalo. The Tigermen were obviously sly and skilled hunters. They used one of their nimblest aerial mounts as bait and repeatedly moved in front of the white dragon. As long as the white dragon's attention and breath were attracted, the others would take this opportunity to attack and tear open the wounds on the white dragon's back and wings. But when the white dragon roared and counterattacked, not hesitating to kill its mortal enemy, the tiger men immediately scattered. The small winged dragon flew quite quickly and was quite agile. The clumsy white dragon was unable to catch up at all, and the advantage of being small was even more obvious. The tiger men were patient hunters. They wouldn't care about winning or losing in an instant. They would only slowly try to teach their prey a lesson and wait for their prey to enter a desperate situation. Meanwhile, on the ground, the copper dragon was still smiling happily at me as if he didn't care about the battle in the sky at all. "You're not going to help? That's one of your brethren? It seems that he's seriously injured." The white dragon's wingspan was only 3 to 4 meters. It would be difficult to say that he had just reached adulthood, and his wings were still pierced with several dozen bloody harpoons. He was slowing down, and the situation seemed quite bad. Meanwhile, the copper dragon before me seemed to be just watching the show. "My brethren aren't white dragons. Perhaps you should learn more about dragons. Dragons of any species only have basic respect for other species. The concept of brethren and brethren shouldn't be used carelessly, not to mention the differences between color dragons and metal dragons. White dragons that just reached adulthood are no different from wild beasts. They'll even eat their own young when they're starving. As a copper dragon, it's already amazing that I haven't done anything to save a white dragon. I'll be laughed at by the other metal dragons if word gets out that I went to save a white dragon. Besides, an elite hunter from the Eternal Thunder tribe? You cowards with cat heads, stop bullying little dragons. Come face the wrath of a true dragon." With an angry roar, a gigantic blue dragon appeared in the sky. Unlike Halen's brother, who had just reached adulthood, this blue dragon was more than 20 meters long, reaching the standard of an immemorial dragon. Its body was so streamlined that the lines of its scales could not be seen clearly. The horn on its forehead was filled with thunderbolts. Each of its front claws was holding a pearl-shaped relic. In the next moment, the sky was covered by dark clouds. Its blue wings spread out and it flew towards the battlefield in the sky. Before they even got close to their opponents, the draconic aura that only a strong dragon could possess and the thunderclouds above their heads that were summoned by the voltage had already made the draconic mounts panic. The aerial knight had to shout loudly to prevent these flesh-winged wyverns from fleeing. The most incomprehensible thing was that the summoned thundercloud had already sent out a series of chain lightning. The first target was actually the white dragon that was being beaten up. Besides, my sister can't take it anymore. If I steal her prey, she'll probably give me a good beating. Apart from its high speed, this is the blue dragon, which is also known as the most aggressive among the dragons. The flying blue dragon Evelyn had no intentions of helping the white dragon as it wailed in pain and seemed to be blocking her path. She even flapped her wings at the white dragon. However, Evelyn's wings were larger than the white dragon's body. This single flap of her wings directly knocked the white dragon unconscious, causing it to violently crash into the ground. Boom. This was far too cruel. Even though she was supposed to help the white dragon, she unhesitatingly used an area of effect attack. She was also a color dragon, yet she actually attacked the white dragon, who was also a color dragon. It seems that Fifth Sister has been under a lot of pressure recently. This isn't strange at all. Before the white dragons obtain intelligence, we won't treat them as equals. They're nothing more than wild beasts before they reach the immemorial dragon level. The other residents here are capable of taming them, so they're not only a threat to us, but look at those semi-dragons. They're probably hybrids of the white dragons. My sister has always hated these types of dragons without intelligence. She believes that it's an insult for them to look so similar to her. However, compared to the various natures of the dragons, the girl before me was the one who attracted me the most. She's so beautiful. What? Did I say something strange? Even the silly cat was so frightened that she stood up on her hind legs. She has the exact same soul and memories, but her physical body has influenced her to go down different paths. This is a miracle given to me by the god of probability. If I can dissect her, I might even be able to find a way for the physical body to influence the soul. As expected, this is the correct style. Yep, that's right. This is Roland. The exclamations around me made me feel infuriated. However, I was personally quite interested in Evelyn's situation. After all, she was my very first original sin creation. She had even evolved and perfected herself over a long period of time. If I could dissect her, carefully study her, I would definitely benefit greatly. Unfortunately, it seemed that none of these 10 dragons would be easy to fool. Wanting them to willingly walk onto my surgery table, cooperate with my research would be easier said than done. You want me to be dissected? Dream on. You only need to point your blade at Cher, and us sisters will fight you to the death. Did I accidentally say that out loud? I don't have such a habit, do I? You damn silly cat. Evelyn, let me explain. I was just making an example. I knew what the problem was just by looking at the silly cat's smug expression. Although my magical pet contract's soul connection was quite useful, it was also a double-edged sword. If I wasn't careful, I might accidentally reveal something. Now, the silly cat was definitely secretly telling on me. I finally managed to explain that dissection was just an academic term for careful research. But this time, the copper dragon was looking at me with an even more vigilant expression, forcing me to temporarily give up on my future research plans. Damn it, I was intending to use Cher as bait to make her cooperate with my research. Harloise, it's all your fault. Do you really think that everyone else isn't vigilant? Did you forget how many people saw you threaten the Snake Archduchess? Did you forget that I was the unfortunate one who became a warning to others? She's always been on guard against you. Didn't you see that she doesn't need any of our food and water? Harloise's words were quite convincing. Evelyn's stance was indeed quite amusing. She could be called a dragon's, but her soul and memories were filled with the scent of humans. In fact, she even had an unclear relationship with the Bardi Empire. She could be called a human, but she was indeed the Grand Elder of the Dragons. It would seem that I need to have a good talk with her. Yep, even if it's only for the sake of obtaining the only experimental material, I need to have a good talk. Now that even the lab rats were on guard, it would be impossible for me to carry out my original plan. I might as well put this matter aside for now. Meanwhile, the battle in the sky was nearing its end. When Blue Dragon Evelyn appeared in the sky, the battle's outcome was already determined. The tiger-headed people known as the Eternal Thunder People were completely helpless against the ancient dragon-class Blue Dragon. The moment they saw the Blue Dragon, they didn't hesitate to turn tail and run. Unfortunately, against the swiftest dragon that was adept at controlling lightning and gales, only a few of them managed to escape. Only a few were lucky enough to escape. As for the white dragon, I hoped that the white dragon's corpse would still be intact when it fell into the distant basin. But when considering the white dragon's beast-like intelligence and reproductive abilities, one more or one less wouldn't make a difference. The blue dragon Evelyn wanted to take this opportunity to move around. We also managed to capture a few more captives. Upon closer inspection, I discovered that these tiger-headed men were definitely different species from the beastmen of my world. In fact, it was highly likely that they didn't even share the same ancestor. The beastmen of H's world were quite similar to humans in terms of body structure. They were like branches branching off a large tree. The most obvious difference between humans and beastmen was that beastmen often had beastly characteristics, and the most serious beastly characteristics would be having a beast's head and ears. Actually, beastmen were still somewhat similar in terms of aesthetic. However, the tiger-headed men before me seemed to have evolved in a different direction. It would be rather difficult to explain, but it was quite obvious just by looking at the examples before me. The tiger-headed men before me all had tiger heads that were even smaller than a human's head. Their average height was less than 1.6 meters, but they all had stooped backs. They were also used to walking on all fours, as if their joints wouldn't allow them to stand up straight. Their limbs weren't beastmen's fingers either. Instead, they had 3 sharp claws that were used to form lethal weapons. They wore light armor, but it seemed more like cloth that was randomly pieced together. The pair of fleshy wings that kept flapping on their backs exposed their restless hearts. Even under the dragon's breath, their murky eyes were filled with a thirst for flesh and blood. Their claws still reeked of blood and flesh. Not to mention, they had 2 long fangs that stuck out of their mouth. Even without looking at the strange color of the spears on their backs and the blood grooves, it was obvious that these tiger-headed men were incredibly dangerous beast-like creatures. Where is this place? If no one knows how to speak, eat them all. What surprised me was that the copper dragon directly spoke in the draconic language. Ghastly Wind Plains. This is the Ghastly Wind Plains. Hunters of our brown-tailed tiger tribe, powerful divine beasts. I don't know what request you have for coming to our homeland. We attacked the white semi-dragon only because it attacked our pasture and took away our meat. Alright, the copper dragon was a divine beast, while the white dragon was a semi-dragon. It seemed that even the local natives didn't take the white dragon seriously. It was all because the white dragons had low intelligence, grew slowly, didn't know magic, and even had the bad habit of eating eggs and their children. With such a list, the white dragons were indeed the weakest dragons. What was even more surprising was that a tiger-headed man with a golden feather on his forehead answered the copper dragon's question. Although his accent was a little strange, he was indeed speaking the draconic language. The draconic language, which was regarded as the threshold to becoming a mage, wasn't easy to learn at all. This type of language was naturally magical, with a large number of retroflex consonants and infrasonic waves that couldn't be heard by the human ear. Many untalented apprentices would even cut their own throats and tongues in an attempt to master the draconic language. It was publicly acknowledged that if a certain tribe could master the draconic language to a certain degree, that tribe wouldn't be far from producing spellcasters. Even the stupid dog-headed tribe would produce natural spellcasters. If it wasn't for the fact that these fellows, who appeared to be ferocious beasts, were talented in the language, it would be that the dragons had used a long period of time and dragon breath to teach these little things how to actively communicate with the dragons. Ghastly Wind Plains? Looks like we're really unlucky this time. It's really far from the more mountains that we're going to. Isn't the teleportation point fixed? How can such a large-scale random teleportation be done? The teleportation point is fixed, but it'll depend on luck to teleport there. That's because the celestial bodies here are so annoying, causing the entire plane's coordinates to randomly drift. I looked up at the sky and saw the 3 moons in the sky. I nodded thoughtfully. There were powerful celestial body interference sources at such a close distance. Not only that, these interference sources would randomly increase or decrease in strength. With so many powerful interference sources intersecting with each other, it would be quite difficult to teleport to this continent, let alone have a precise location. What's the environment like here? Could you give us an introduction? I don't know. Don't be so surprised. Even though we spend most of our time in Dragon World for the sake of rapidly growing stronger, this world is huge. How could we possibly know everything? All I know is that there was a huge battle here in the past. I heard that several powerful dragons' elders died here. The glorious tiger god is invincible. Kill these damned lizards. Although I didn't hear any loud noises, the golden-feathered tigerman's mutterings sounded like they were right next to my ears. And judging from Evelyn's reaction, this place seemed to be quite far away from the dragon's core area. In that case, just this point alone made this place quite suitable for my taste. Aerial knights have taken off to explore and draw map. Engineers are constructing temporary defense lines. Perhaps this will be our future home. Chapter 399. The fragrant scent of plants and trees refreshed everyone's spirit. However, the constant howling of beasts in the distance made everyone instinctively feel uncomfortable. Although the brownish-yellow soil with a hint of blood red seemed rather frightening, Drool had already announced that this was incredibly fertile soil. It was so fertile that all one needed to do was sprinkle seeds and nothing else, and they would be able to harvest a great harvest. In just a short few dozen hours, this place had already changed greatly. With the wood spirit's assistance, it wasn't difficult to set up a base here. In less than one night, a wall of thorns had been erected to create a living area for the humans. At the very least, this would prevent the beasts from spying on them. The simple treehouses were also able to provide shelter from the wind and rain. In the sky, the Borealis searchlights constantly scanned the entire base. The Mizar was resting and reorganizing, while the Avarice was accompanied by a frigate on an exploration mission. Meanwhile, the engineers were constructing defensive structures, and numerous goblin cannons and armored tanks were being pushed out of the airship. The most eye-catching part was probably the gigantic tower currently under construction in the center of the base. This tower's foundation was made of metal, but the large amounts of adamantine and mithril components were incredibly valuable. Even dragons would be dazzled by this tower's brilliance. The outer shell of the main tower was covered in dense magical runes. The outer shell was also covered in thick magical thorns, giving it a classical and natural appearance. There were also 4 smaller tower foundations around the main tower. The 5 towers were connected by constantly flashing magical runes. A mystical connection had already been established. 2 of the leaders, Timlad and Olivia, were personally supporting the construction of the main tower. Just this alone was enough to prove how important this tower was to the Bardi Empire. What's this? A new type of mage tower? Extracting energy from the ground? Are you intending on helping us or settling here? Haha, take a guess. Fine, if we build a base here, won't we be in the same boat as you? At the very least, we won't allow the revived Titan giants to destroy our hard work. Indeed, judging from how many white dragons were being hunted here, there shouldn't be any powerful dragon residences nearby. And after confirming that this place was far away from the dragon's core territory, I decided to build a large-scale base here. No matter how I look at it, this doesn't seem like an outpost at all. You've always been so stingy, yet you actually invested so much into it? Do you intend to invade Dragon World? Let me say this first. There are more than 10,000 dragons here, and every lord has their own vassal group. There are also many primordial dragons and primordial dragons. Are you sure you can handle them? Copper Dragon's attitude was rather strange. She didn't give me the impression that she was worried about how the dragons would be affected, but rather that I would anger the dragons and cause them trouble. Simply speaking, her stance and attitude were both quite skewed. Ever since I first met her, I had this feeling. She was somewhat interested in the humans of Bardi, but only slightly interested. She was also rather lukewarm towards the dragons. She lived in seclusion in the human kingdom's underground as if she wasn't close to anyone, forming her own faction. Why are you worried about me? Indeed, a little. After all, you are our creator and can be considered a good friend. Although you don't even remember it yourself. Looking at your ignorant face, just this point alone makes me want to beat you up. Copper Dragon was quite direct and told me about our past friendship. However, this made me feel rather conflicted. At the very least, Based on the information I knew and the fact that there were no records of our relationship in the library, it seemed that our past grudges were quite complicated. I might as well pretend that I didn't hear anything about her being my ex-girlfriend, but at the very least, we had a good relationship in the past. Trust needed time to accumulate, and the feeling of being able to talk about everything required a long period of time to form. This feeling of having an old friend who knew everything, while you yourself didn't know anything at all, made me feel rather helpless. Then, can I trust you? When we have a conflict with the dragons, it's not a fundamental conflict where we have to fight to the death. It's a conflict that doesn't involve fundamental benefit. However, Evelyn suddenly chuckled. Perhaps you really should learn more about dragons. Dragons don't even have the concept of being of the same species. The number of dragons that Dragon City can control is directly related to the Dragon King's power level. The Dragon Kings are mostly responsible for the foundational matters. Every single dragon is an independent individual. I nodded. This was to be expected. After all, the dragon's internal conflicts were also the type where one would have to fight to the death. The powerful dragons and the weak humans had completely different social structures. Since it was only natural for the dragons to fight against each other, powerful individuals didn't have many natural enemies, so they didn't need to band together. Naturally, they didn't care about the benefits of the entire species. That is to say, as long as the price is high enough, the dragons themselves won't care about anything. And the oldest of us is only around 200 years old. To the dragons, that's nothing more than a long hibernation. We don't have many connections to begin with, and the only reason we're able to become elders here is because our fists are strong enough. You're asking if you can trust us? Perhaps you should ask yourself if you're able to offer us something that we're interested in. I do have quite a few good things here, but it all depends on whether or not you're willing to pay an equivalent price. But since this matter is so important, if you want to back out after I tell you, you'll kill me to keep me quiet. No, I'm a civilized person. How could I possibly do such a thing? We signed a contract beforehand that you're not allowed to reveal anything. There'll always be loopholes in this type of contract. You're not an irresolute person. If you break the contract, someone will naturally come looking for trouble with you. Alright, I'll have to start from a long time ago. Around 100 years ago, I met Ale in the river Styx, and after that, our plan was carried out step by step. The most important part was that the law god ascended to godhood. Now, we're at the third step of our plan. Alright, this is what we want you to do. If you break the contract, Ale will personally come looking for trouble with you. It took me more than 3 hours to explain everything clearly. The two Evelyns kept asking me questions, and they were also communicating internally. I could occasionally hear things like, "Second sister wants me to ask you," "Eighth sister wants me to ask," and so on. It seemed that the Evelyns were actually able to directly communicate with each other. Their shared souls had formed a soul network that constantly resonated with each other. That's our plan. You can see that if our plan succeeds, you'll naturally receive abundant rewards. I just don't know what you're planning on doing. What I saw were several pairs of eyes that were abnormally complex. I never expected that you'd actually succeed. You're truly daring. You're basically becoming the enemy of all the current gods. You're even crazier than before. The chances of this plan succeeding are far too low. I thought that they would refuse, but I heard a third person's voice. We can understand what you're doing, and we approve of your hard work. However, we won't help you. A silver-haired Evelyn suddenly appeared in front of me. It seemed that the copper dragon was currently maintaining her projection. But we'll help you deal with some troublesome matters and mislead the dragons. Only after you prove the feasibility of this plan will we begin helping you on the surface. This was yet another projection. Her sapphire-like eyes contained a mysterious emotion. She was the original Evelyn, and as the eldest sister among the Evelyns, her words were the final decision of the other Evelyns. At the very least, we can be considered allies now, or perhaps it's more appropriate to call us accomplices? I heaved a sigh of relief when the Evelyns all had complex expressions and agreed in unison. This was quite a big deal, after all. It would have been quite troublesome if the Evelyns had adamantly opposed my plan. However, I didn't regret telling them the truth. With their help and protection, the success rate of this plan would increase by at least 20%. My intuition and emotions kept telling me that these old friends before me were trustworthy. Although I still had a backup plan, this was indeed the best possible result. Only in novels would people immediately submit to me after making such bold claims. Without first confirming the sturdiness of this boat, who would dare to casually board it? After confirming that we were going to set up camp here, I also arranged a place for the two Evelyns to live in. Many plans were also being carried out. Did those tiger heads tell us any information about the nearby area? No. Only their leader knows how to speak the dragon language. However, when he saw that we were going to set up camp here, he closed his eyes and didn't say anything. He kept looking at our interrogators with hostility, as if we were invaders. How troublesome. Right, they're half-beastmen. Can the beast tamer and Drool communicate with them? I've already tried. Drool says that they're all filled with violent thoughts and refuses to communicate with them in depth. As for the beast tamer, didn't you already send out the strongest beast tamer? Even the strongest Drool isn't here. Tisk, that guy still hasn't returned. No, it seems that he's met with some trouble. The strongest beast tamer? Yep. He was the existence whose name was becoming more and more unmentionable. However, there were some things that needed to be done by him. I felt that if he was here, these tiger heads would probably confess everything. Perhaps they would even fight and resolve their grudges. They would probably even form a deep friendship with someone. But now, none of them were here. Several days ago, I sent out Eaglestorm, Bayfong, Ainslow, and Diana to the Earth elemental plane to obtain the god equipment of wind. However, they still hadn't returned even after the scheduled departure date. It seemed that they had met with some trouble. What? Why didn't I go personally? I was too busy, so I decided to leave this legendary level quest to my underlings. I felt that their success rate was at least 90%. Perhaps they could even help me bring back an epic-ranked treasure chest, or something. However, probability was something that was hard to say. With my luck, even if I had a 99% success rate, it was still possible that I would fail. If I didn't go, perhaps the success rate would increase, and if I did go, I would probably have some miraculous encounters. Main character treatment? Calamity Starlight bracelets count as main character treatment? That's more like a main character in a comic. Cough, cough. I seem to have accidentally exposed something again. I was no calamity, nor did I have a dangling treasure chest. Yet, I had a major failure with a 95% success rate. It seemed that I had accidentally entered something. This team has a healer, a tank, and a fighter, so it shouldn't be too difficult, right? Indeed, no matter if it's Camdron or the great stone sculptor Ainslow, neither of them are that trustworthy. Perhaps someone wants to steal the loot when they open the treasure chest. It's fine if they only want to kick someone out of the team, but I'm afraid that someone might want to kill them and steal their loot. Will your subordinates die if you don't curse them? You're such a jinx. But soon, the Air Knight and the Greedy Wolf airship that went on a patrol mission brought back an unexpected gift for me. That white dragon actually didn't die. That's quite an explanation. Humph, white dragons only have thick skin and thick flesh. Otherwise, they would have gone extinct long ago. Blue Dragon Evelyn didn't seem to care at all. She truly wasn't interested in the white dragon's life or death. It was just that ever since she showed her cards to me, she seemed to like hanging around me more. After I confirmed with the other copper dragons, I learned that she was indeed my liaison with the Evelyns. But to be honest, rather than the aggressive blue dragons, I wanted the copper dragons to be more sociable. At this moment, The one glaring angrily at the heavily injured white dragon was our Lord Liaison. If it was only a half-dead white dragon, it wouldn't have been a pleasant surprise. What was a pleasant surprise was that this white dragon was actually a female dragon that was about to give birth. It would seem that the Eternal Thunder Tribe's goal was dragon eggs from the very start. If they can obtain these little white dragons, their tribe's overall power level will increase by at least 10 times. And because of this, the white dragon unsurprisingly had an early miscarriage. However, it seemed that the Eternal Thunder Tribe had been aiming for quite some time. Their timing was quite good, as the pregnancy period was nearing its end. Even if the white dragon miscarried during this period, the dragon eggs would still be in relatively good condition. Of the 7 dragon eggs, at least 5 still have a chance of hatching. Originally, there were 9 eggs. Our people discovered 2 shattered shells somewhere. Who did this? Who did this so quickly? She directly swallowed this white dragon in order to recover from her injuries. Alright then, it would seem that it wasn't a legend for white dragons to eat their own children. No wonder these white dragons were so disliked by their own kind. They were no different from wild beasts. No, even normal wild beasts wouldn't do such a thing. However, I was rather delighted to see the white dragon eggs before me. Dragon eggs that had just been born were rare items that couldn't even be bought on the black market, mainly because I was worried about being hunted down by adult dragons. Aren't they just some useless white dragon eggs? Why are you so happy? Could it be that you intend to tame some white dragons to become dragon knights? It'll take at least 80 years for them to be useful. Even if they become young dragons, they'll still be nothing more than wild beasts that only know how to fight. Useless? That might not be the case. Evelyn, why do you think white dragons are nothing more than wild beasts? Why? They weren't born that way. I shook my head. Although this was the mainstream way of thinking in the world, it wasn't magic at all. Many things that seemed so natural and common sense would have their own mysteries if you looked deeper into it. Actually, humans are the same. Some children are lost in the forest and raised by animals. When they grow up, they directly become so-called wolf children. They don't even need to speak. They eat raw meat and are no different from wild beasts. You're saying? Evelyn nodded thoughtfully. She had heard similar rumors before. Dragons are born powerful. They'll be able to inherit the most basic knowledge and wisdom of the previous generation while they're still in their dragon eggs. In fact, they don't even need a teacher, which is a necessary job class for other species. However, it's obvious that white dragons are different. I paused for a moment as I recalled a rumor that might be able to support my point. I've heard that silver dragons and crystal dragons will sometimes steal white dragon eggs and raise the young white dragons to take care of themselves. Is that true? Evelyn nodded. This wasn't much of a secret. Many famous white dragons in Dragon City had gotten their names this way. In that case, if we can make up for the white dragon's lack of inheritance, will we be able to create a species that's no weaker than other species of dragons? I'm quite skilled when it comes to memories and souls. In terms of physical strength, white dragons aren't bad. Their element is also my favorite ice element. It's worth a try. Do you have time? Their growth is astonishingly slow. I naturally have a plan. Right, if my experiment is successful, can you help me obtain some white dragon eggs? It's impossible to sell or raise them. If you can prove that you can really make white dragons more like dragons, you should be able to discuss this with the other elders. That's good enough. Let's try it. Chapter 400. You're hopeless. Remember to buy a good grave first, in case you don't have a place to bury yourself after you die. Sometimes, when a doctor told you this, it wasn't that you were hopeless, it was that they were saying, if you want to live, don't be stingy with your medical fees. And if you were truly hopeless, the doctor probably wouldn't say anything in front of you. The doctor would either inform your family or try to shirk responsibility. During negotiations, they used similar techniques a lot. First, I would make the problem sound as serious as possible and raise it high. If you were scared, then I would naturally accept all sorts of conditions that were similar to blackmail. I was used to using such techniques in negotiations in the past, but this time I didn't lie. This dimension's collapse is unstoppable. Since the Titans have already awakened, and even their incarnations are moving about freely in the outside world, it's almost impossible to make them fall back into slumber. That's right, if someone had already awakened from slumber and was ready to get up, was there any way to make them fall back asleep? Although I didn't know who had placed the seal on the Titans, it had to be at least on the level of the goddess of order or chaos to be able to seal away an entire species in a perfectly balanced dimension. And now there was a flaw in the perfect seal that the Titans had placed. It would be incredibly difficult to fix. The seal in the past was like an intricate door lock created by a master craftsman. Now that part of the lock is broken, if you want to fix the lock, you'll need to first understand the lock structure, and it'll be best if you have a blueprint for the lock. Then you can take it off and fix it. Of course, the simplest way is to just add a lock to the side. According to this line of thought, if I wanted to fix the seal, I would first have to undo the seal, but that would be the end of this world. And the so-called simplest way to deal with the Titans was to simply add a new seal on the surface of the seal. That would be meaningless. Since the Titans were able to shatter the old seal, a new seal would be even easier. That was why, even though the dragons had racked their brains and searched through all the ancient records, they still couldn't find a solution. Actually, they didn't have much hope in coming to ask a human mage for help. But in a situation like this, I directly said that I couldn't do it. This was basically saying, even though you invited me here, you're still hopeless. The person I invited couldn't help me, yet he was still smiling proudly and speaking as if it was only natural. Horace was rendered speechless for a long while before he managed to say something. You are very sincere. Of course, honesty is a virtue, but telling lies that can be seen through is not morality, but pure stupidity. Indeed, lies could be highly beneficial in certain situations. However, based on my experience with Little Red and I, it would be foolish to lie when dealing with dragons, especially older ones. Apart from the fact that dragons loved to cast lie detection and truth detection spells on themselves, the worst part was that these large lizards who relied on their instincts would often have astonishing intuition. They would be able to use their intuition alone to determine if someone was being kind or lying. But if there's really no other way, there's no need for me to come. I swirled the glass. Through the bright red of blood, the scene in front of me was like a dream. Although they will awaken and this space is destined to collapse, it's not like there's no other way. We can completely delay the time it takes for them to awaken, and there's even a way to stop the collapse. Of course, to do that, the price we have to pay is not small. After I finished my discussion with Horace, or perhaps I should say that I finished tricking him, the welcoming party naturally came to an end. However, it was already late at night outside. I didn't follow Horace's invitation to stay at the location that Dragon City had arranged for me. Instead, I chose to return to the Borealis, which was parked outside the city, and wait for tomorrow morning for a formal discussion. After all, sometimes it was better to be more careful, especially when you had all sorts of valuable treasures on you, and you just happened to enter a group of professional bandits. Professional bandits? Ein Mises, Little Red, will probably be quite displeased if she finds out that you're belittling dragons like this. No, if she really finds out, she'll only proudly praise me. After all, she's the female dragon who wrote a manual on why to rob others. In her mind, robbing is also a skill, and she herself is a master of this skill. As I strolled through the streets of the Dragon City, I admired the priceless jade buildings as I spoke ill of the dragon race. You don't say. They were like this back in the day as well. They basically viewed robbing as a normal job. Not only did the color dragons have no qualms about robbing others, even the metal dragons often did similar things. However, they would often use the excuse that they were fighting against evil. But in the end, all the wealth of those villains would vanish without a trace. Ha, that's because they've been the strongest individual in the mortal plane for such a long period of time. Nobody would care if they did bad things, so it's only natural that they would lose control of their violence. It's just like how naughty brats with no one to teach them how to be tyrannical. It's quite normal for them to treat other people's belongings as their own. As Harlois and I walked down the street, not only did we constantly attract the attention of bystanders, we also attracted many followers. However, as we walked, these followers would gradually disappear. The previous incident had already made us into a moving bomb in the eyes of the dragons. In order to prevent us from causing trouble, there were naturally people secretly following us and chasing away uninvited guests. Even though we clearly knew that there were people secretly following us, we still fearlessly badmouthed the dragons. In fact, we even intentionally spoke louder. Are we going back now? Of course not. It's rare for us to be here, so I want to take a look at Dragon City's night scenery. You're going to parade around with a bunch of tails? Do you really like being treated like a monkey show? Of course not. That's why we should change our clothes. We randomly found a random corner and wandered in. Suddenly, a series of traffic accidents occurred behind us, and when we reappeared, we were no longer the same two people as before. Red full-body armor and a gigantic heavy sword on one's back, along with a powerful aura of a dragon bloodline, were quite common in this city. Due to certain reasons, warriors who intentionally hid their faces from others were now the norm. After all, the awakening of a dragon bloodline would bring them power, and they would be considered lucky if they could still maintain an acceptable physical appearance. Pure-blooded dragons would also judge others based on their appearance, and it wouldn't feel good to be treated as a bastard. As for the most commonly seen detection magic, I was immune to it from the very start. When I brushed past the panicked follower, the heavy sword transformed back into the black cat that leaped onto my shoulder. She lazily rolled around and scratched her cat whiskers, as if this was the most comfortable position for her. Where are we going? Are we going to rob the dragon's treasure trove? Or are we going to steal some more dragon eggs? I'm not a dragon, and I don't have such hobbies. Besides, if we cause any more trouble, won't everyone know that we did it? Let's go see what the dragons are hiding. What they're hiding? Yep. Haven't you noticed that this city is far too peaceful? You're talking about the giants. I nodded. Halen's impression of the giants and dragons was that they were fighting each other. I doubted that the dragons would be able to defeat all those troublesome giants in such a short period of time, and even if the dragons won, they would definitely suffer tremendous losses. I wanted to learn more about the giants' actual combat strength, and it would be even better if I had a battle report from the dragons and dragons. Why don't you let the dragons lead the way? No matter what, we're all allies now. Would you let your allies see how weak you are? That's true. But unfortunately, even though we did our best to search for them, we still couldn't find any traces of injured dragons, even though we followed the paths of healing and drinking water to search for them. Even the dragons would need large amounts of food, water, and medicine to recover after being injured. It would seem that the dragons really aren't here. Then where would they be? The front lines? Don't tell me there's another dragon city? Hey, why are you thinking about it so seriously? I'm just saying it casually. No, it might actually be possible. I don't think that the dragons would so easily reveal their true location. Our two envoys chatted as we walked. We would also occasionally look at the roadside stalls and try to pick up some rare treasures. What? We weren't doing our jobs anymore? We were doing our jobs. Weren't all diplomats supposed to be spies? Look at us, we were still trying to gather information about the dragon's citizens. How could we be so professional? It seems like you're thinking about something really rude. Not all diplomats are spies or scouts. They're the ones responsible for maintaining the relationship between two countries. They have such a hard time. Yep, they have to do their best to test the color of the dragon's underwear, and then they have to incite the dragon's citizens to go out on the street. Finally, they even have to do their best to support the dragon's opposition. What a tough job. Although we still didn't gain much, chatting improved our moods quite a bit. To be honest, if the situation allowed for it, I'd really like to make a trade with the dragons. After all, every dragon is a treasure trove. So many resources accumulated together would be nothing to scoff at. How are we supposed to trade? It's not like the dragons lack anything. They lack plenty of things. Haven't you noticed how simple life in Dragon City is? They don't even have casinos, brothels, or bars like normal cities do. And even if they lack nothing, can't we just create consumption? Eating, drinking, and pooping won't earn us any money. You're saying? Don't be fooled by Little Red's playful appearance. She actually cares a lot about her scales. Every once in a while, she'll go take a volcano bath, and she'll regularly polish her nails. It's said that if she doesn't take care of her nails for a long time, her combat strength will decrease. I wasn't making this up. A human's nails would be dry and cracked, which would probably make them look ugly. However, if a dragon's nails broke when they clawed, it would probably make their enemies laugh their heads off. Volcano baths were rich in minerals and fire elements, which would make a red dragon's scales even more energetic and sturdy. This was also a necessary way to increase a dragon's defensive abilities. Of course, after taking a volcano bath, her scales would glow for a period of time. This was one of the reasons why red dragons and silver dragons always fought over volcanoes. It was said that silver dragons were the dragons who loved beauty the most. See, it's so troublesome for those mothers to take care of their babies. They can transform into human form, but their babies are even bigger than they are, and they're difficult to take care of. We can provide them with a pet storage service so that they can happily go out on the street. Yep, we can even sell them collars so that they can tie up their babies and walk around. Why does it sound like a human pet shop? Cough, don't mind such a small matter. Besides, apart from those traditional services, we can also do beauty and nail salons here. Just look at how monotonous their wings are. They're either red or blue. There's only one color. We can also provide tattoo services, such as embroidery of a tiger or a lion. Let's not talk about how awkward it would be to embroider a tiger's head on a dragon's body. One wing of a dragon is red and the other is white? Would that be considered a red dragon or a white dragon? Yep. Harlois, you're such a genius. You reminded me. This is such a great idea. We can also provide services to transform into other dragons. For example, if you're bored of being a black dragon, you can paint a layer of gold on your body and disguise your dragon head and wings, pretending to be a gold dragon. This will be much more convenient for robbing others, who would want to always be on guard against a righteous gold dragon. Don't tell me. I think that if you really do this, you'll probably be hunted down by all dragons, especially the gold dragons. Right, you. Chatting was probably the best way to relax. To be honest, Dragon City gave me quite a bit of pressure. After all, anyone would tremble at the sight of so many saint-ranked, legend-ranked, and above combat strength on the street. Not to mention, I had to entertain all the dragon elders at the banquet. Even the weakest dragon would be an immemorial dragon that would be no weaker than any ordinary myth-ranked individual. As for the strongest, there were at least 5 of them that I couldn't even see through. A conservative estimate would be that they were all far stronger than I was at my peak. The dragons are truly blessed by the heavens. These gold bloodlines are so easy to obtain. As long as they reach adulthood, they'll be at least at the gold rank. With just a bit of training, they'll be able to easily crush ordinary legend-ranked individuals. Meanwhile, humans will only be able to reach the peak of silver even if they train for an entire lifetime. Right, since they're so powerful, they must have had quite a good life in the game's history. However, I directly shook my head. They're basically the same as mages. For the first half of the game, they were all useless teammates who were sleepwalking. They thought that they'd be able to stay out of the battle, but by the time they noticed that the situation was off and joined the battle was already about to collapse. Just like the Cloud Tower? Only now did I recall that I hadn't told Harlois about the Mage Country's terrible performance in the game's history. Yep, actually, it's the same thing. They're both overly confident in their own power, so they're used to watching the outside world change. They think that everything is just a temporary storm, and when they discover that they've fallen into a deep swamp and are unable to escape, it'll be difficult for them to rise up again. Didn't you notice that whenever I talked about the Holy War, that Horus guy would either feign ignorance and smile foolishly while stroking his beard, or he would change the topic? It's obvious that the dragons still intend to stay out of the battle. What happened to the dragons in the game's history? Nothing much. It's just that the tallest trees always attract the most attention. The dragons were transformed into bone dragon armies by the undead, slaughtered by evil gods, parasitized by insects, cooked and eaten by the giant. In the end, even the human empire's battleships had to avoid the scattered dragons. Of course, the dragons still joined the allied armies later on, but they suffered tremendous losses. Some of their branches even went completely extinct. Oh, so you're a prophet as well? Are the dragons so pitiful in the future? Could you tell me in detail? What astonished me the most was that the person who had interrupted my conversation with Harlois through our mental link was right behind me. I suddenly turned around and discovered that it was a seemingly young snow elf. He was short and not even as tall as my lover, and his apple-like face was incredibly cute. How is this possible? How could a conversation through a mental link possibly be eavesdropped on? I had an expression of astonishment as I clenched the white rose in my sleeve. My expression was still pale with fright, but I was seriously considering what information I could divulge, as well as the possibility of silencing Harlois in Dragon City. Youngsters these days are truly frightening. They're always thinking about silencing others. Relax, youngster, I've come with good intentions. Please put away that white rose of yours. I'm old and can't take any fright. The snow elf, who looked like a young boy, spoke in a mature manner. It was obvious that he was an old demon. His seemingly pure silver-white eyes had actually seen through everything. My name has long since been forgotten by the world. You can call me Sam, the supreme immemorial white dragon. Now that I think about it, I'm the great-grandfather of the white dragon you killed earlier. By the way, how much do you charge for coloring a white dragon into a gold dragon? Can I owe you? I'm quite poor. Chapter 401. Debt? Sorry, I can do that for other species, but don't even think about dragons. I've been dealing with dragons for quite some time now. If they say that they owe me a debt, that means they don't intend to pay me back. They're basically on the same level as elementary school bullies. He unhesitatingly said such malicious words. But borrowing money without returning it, stealing a child's toy, wasn't this just like a school bully? Isn't this racism? You're discriminating against dragons in Dragon City. Do you want to die a pitiful death? I think that dragons are indeed worthy of discrimination when it comes to honesty. Have you ever borrowed money from other dragons in the past? Although he said such inappropriate words, his heart was pounding like a drum. Why is this old monster looking for me? Although white dragons were despised by dragons, they were still pigs. It was already ridiculous for a white dragon to have the title of Supreme Immemorial Dragon. Not to mention, he was still a dragon. Supreme Immemorial Dragons were the most ancient existences among all dragons. There was no limit to their strength, so it was difficult to estimate just how strong they were. Since he was a Supreme Immemorial Dragon, he was likely a powerful individual who had survived the ancient god wars. Existences who lived for tens of thousands of years were doubtlessly the strongest of all dragons. Naturally, they were also the strongest in the world. Any white dragon that appeared in the world would be ranked in the top 10 of the calamity rankings. He was far from someone that a youngster like me with only 300 years of experience could deal with. Such existences had long since surpassed Dragon City's control. After experiencing endless wars in time, most white dragons didn't care much about power and status. No matter what species of dragon they were, they would usually live in seclusion. It was quite incomprehensible for him to suddenly come looking for me. Actually, I originally wanted to do business with you, but since I met a true great prophet, I naturally want to know more. I hated these old fellows the most. They had so many random abilities. How was I supposed to deal with them if they saw through me so easily? Didn't they know that scammers were professional scammers? How was I supposed to scam them if they saw through me? Snap. With a snap of my fingers, the blood dragon armor that covered me disappeared without a trace. Womian's mage robe had the ability to block detection, so I refused to believe that it would be able to pass through my god equipment's protection. As expected, at this moment, the fake Shota frowned. Maybe we need to find a place to talk. I personally came with good intentions. In that case, what kind of kindness would make a supreme primordial dragon come looking for me? The white dragon's inheritance. I was bewildered. I didn't expect that the matter I had casually created would attract such an old monster. However, after thinking about it, it made sense. Allowing the white dragons to stand on the same starting line as the other dragons seemed like nothing more than a non-core technology for us. However, for the white dragons, this was a critical technology that would change the fate of their entire species. It was no wonder that such an ancient existence would appear. Thus I smiled. What I was afraid of was that you would come up and fight me. If I couldn't defeat you, I could only run away. But since you have a request, everything is fine. Perhaps we can talk about cooperation and trade. By the way, I can show you the samples first. A group of white dragon whelps that can already transform. They came out of the dragon eggs less than a month ago. After obtaining the frigid Winterlands world, I felt like I finally received some main character treatment. Humph. Other main characters only have a random treasure or a portable old man, but I have an entire world with me. The current frigid Winterlands was no longer the desolate ice plains of the past. When I first entered this world, even the old white dragon was astonished. In a naturally formed valley basin, the temperature had been raised by humans. Now there was a city called Permafrost Town. Permafrost Town was our theoretical laboratory base. Large numbers of researchers were stationed here to work on their own research project. Snap. With a light snap of my fingers, I arrived at my personal residence. Everyone sat in their own chairs. Although the fake Shota's expression remained calm, his widened eyes revealed his astonishment. Of course, I wouldn't show off for no reason. Even if the fake Shota seemed friendly, I needed to be careful when considering his identity as a white dragon. Showing off my power would also increase the price and safety of the trade, so why not? Leak information about frigid Winterlands? Actually, not only had I already leaked this information after fighting against Zero, the world had changed. Soon, there would no longer be a need to keep this secret. Tea. A steaming hot cup of tea appeared on the table. No matter how long the white dragons had lived, it was impossible for them to have seen something that was almost like the Creator's power. This should be able to prove some of my abilities. I just contacted them. The little white dragons are still in kindergarten. School will end in another 2 hours. Let's chat first and then go take a look. Places with people would naturally have schools. It wasn't my idea to have the little white dragons go to school. The researchers here were quite interested in the dragons who were born with knowledge. In fact, some of them even intended to raise some of their own researchers. As for whether or not there was a Shota or lowly training plan, let's not think too deeply about it for now. However, the researchers here indeed seemed to treat the smart little white dragons as treasures. I had even visited the kindergarten. It was completely closed off, and every child had 3 teachers, one for alchemy, one for engineering, and one for literature. How was I supposed to deal with the fact that there were more teachers than there were children? These guys were addicted to teaching, which was slowing down the research progress. This was how I explained the little white dragon's problem. However, the old white dragon's focus was no longer on the little white dragons. As expected of the Order faction's great prophet in this holy war. This is a completely real world. Is this the authority of the Creator Goddess? Out of all the great prophets in history, you're probably one of the top 3. The old white dragon drank his tea and felt the warmth in his throat. He was now certain that this wasn't some sort of fantasy or soul world. He instantly raised his opinion of Roland even higher. Originally, the old white dragon had only viewed Roland as a junior who had made some achievements. His ability to truly be a prophet increased his opinion of Roland. But now, in this completely real world, the old white dragon now viewed Roland as an existence on the same level as himself. Don't underestimate this existence on the same level. For supreme immemorial dragons, they only needed to maintain the most basic level of respect for even a true god. It was unknown who would die if they went all out. Dragons would never have the habit of worshipping the weak. As they watched the gods change, they even looked down on the unlucky ones who were bound by their own rules. It seemed that only supreme immemorial dragons and immemorial dragons viewed the gods as nothing more than sacrifices and consumables for the world. Not only that, they had always stayed out of the holy war, which made them view all other species as nothing more than ants. Perhaps you would be able to have a good conversation with such an existence if you met him by chance, but he would actually look down on you. It was just like how a human would look down on a harmless little animal. When they were happy, they would play with the animal, but if they accidentally angered the animal or decided to take it out on the animal, it was possible that they would die a horrible death. Actually, dragons weren't the only ones who had this problem. Many ancient gods and golden bloodlines had this problem as well. It was just that dragons had a particularly obvious symptom of growing the corners of their eyes. The only way to cure this problem was to beat them until they were convinced. This is an illness that needs to be cured. First, beat them until they're half dead. This was how I dealt with the black dragons and red dragons who had joined Donglan but were still acting all high and mighty. It was quite effective. But right now I was rather astonished. Why would prophecies have anything to do with the Order faction? The Order faction's great prophet? Does this have anything to do with the Order faction? Isn't prophecy supposed to be a separate magic system? It was rare to meet such a powerful person, and the dragons didn't seem to be tight-lipped either. Of course, this is only the ultimate power of the Order faction. Order has its own rules, and the highest level of rules are nothing more than space and time. Prophecy abilities seem to have no rules at all, but they're actually the materialization of the rules of space and time. Being able to obtain more information than your enemies is the foundational reason why the Order faction's overall combat strength is always greater than the Chaos faction's. Fate is the same. Otherwise, why would the god of fate be in the Order faction? Alright then, this was a secret that completely messed up my knowledge system. In the past, I had always treated prophecy magic as a separate type. But when I thought about it carefully, it was quite possible and logical. But if I really tried to investigate the past, some things would be terrifying. I shook my head and tossed all this nonsense to the back of my mind. I would deal with these things later. I should first deal with the problem before me. Do you have any hopes for the dragon's future? Since you've already heard my prophecy, do you have any plans? Perhaps you short-lived species have too short a lifespan and don't have many memories, but I've personally met quite a few great prophets. The old dragon was quite relaxed as he quietly sipped on his tea. He could tell that this was Moir crystal tea, a special product of the wind elemental plane. If it wasn't for the fact that this plane was so special, it would have been impossible for it to exist in the mortal plane. His relaxed manner seemed to indicate that he wasn't really worried about the Armageddon in his prophecy. I carefully observed him, and discovered that he really didn't seem to care. Those prophets are used to making things sound so serious and thinking about it so seriously. But for prophecies, the moment that the prophecy is made, the future will change. And only prophecies of misfortune are meaningful. After all, calamities will make people wary, while future success and luck will make people lose their will to fight, ultimately changing their fate. But as you can see, no matter what kind of prophecy it is, everything will change after it's made. Nonsense, we of the mist. If the white dragon's prophecy was true, then what was with the prophecy of our destruction? Oh, right, are you the last descendant of the Mist Kingdom? Did you prophesy that your kingdom would be destroyed? I know some things, but it would seem that your kingdom's destruction was mostly because you were too weak. Before I even finished speaking, countless sharp swords of ice descended upon me. The white flames burning within these swords caused Sam to instinctively feel fear. This was a trump card that could threaten me. I once again raised my opinion of this young man in my mind, but I still had a smile on my face. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath as I looked at the calm elderly man. I used too much force in my hand and accidentally crushed the cup in my hand. The headache helped me regain my sense of reason. My sense of reason told me that Sam was correct. However, the anger in my heart kept accumulating. I was quite displeased to be evaluated in such a way, and when I thought about the warriors who fought against misfortune until the very last moment, I felt quite displeased. Indeed, perhaps we humans are still quite weak compared to you dragons, but, at this moment my words were filled with anger, but I was suddenly interrupted. You've misunderstood. How could I possibly be so shallow as to evaluate strength and weakness? I'm talking about the difference between your power to change fate and the power that allowed history to develop normally. Besides, the destruction of the Mist Kingdom back in the day was actually something that far surpassed what mortals could handle. This time, it was my turn to be astonished. Wasn't it all because of the masterminds behind the scenes? If they weren't mortals, then what were they? We're both ice dragons, and I have a good relationship with the Dragon of End. Excelsius, Dragon of End? How could I possibly forget such a Chunibu nickname? Wasn't that the king of Frigid Maw from the Great Snow Mountain? He treated me quite well, and I learned all of my foundational magic from him. Back in the day, when the Mist Kingdom was destroyed, the Great Snow Mountain was cut off from the entire mortal plane. All of the Frigid Maw were trapped in the Snow Mountain. It's likely that there are no more than 10 people in the entire universe who are capable of cutting off and sealing off an entire plane without any side effect. To be honest, I felt that it was like killing a chicken with a butcher's knife, but now that I see you, I can understand. The next instant, the entire mortal plane began to violently tremble. Glaciers began to extend from the ground, and the sky was filled with thunder and lightning. The entire world began to furiously distort. I couldn't hear what else the elderly dragon said, but there was only one sentence that kept repeating in my heart. There was actually a mastermind behind the scenes back in the day. The true culprit hasn't been judged yet. Our enemies are still at large. Chapter 402. Let's not mention the trouble that Beifong had caused for the time being, since he was nothing more than a blind fool. After everyone else left, I left behind the person that I had truly sent to carry out this mission. After all, some things were better if fewer people knew about them. It would be much more fun if schemes were exposed to the public. The great stone sculptor's attempt to ascend to godhood failed? Well done. I nodded after hearing Beifeng's explanation. Actually, this was the true goal of my treasure-hunting team, which was to make a certain someone lose the possibility of ascending to the Earth Elemental God's throne. In normal situations, repairing the Earth Elemental throne would require a large amount of God equipment materials and time. If left alone, it would probably repair itself in several tens of thousands of years. But if one wanted to speed up the repair process, they would need to spend money and materials. The more they spent, the faster the repair process would be. Why does it feel like this is a Chinese scam MMORPG? Fortunately, I'm not one of the players fated to be scammed to death. I'm the mastermind behind the scenes. Originally, I didn't intend to care about the Earth Elemental Throne. After all, this pit was far too deep. It would be fine to just let it repair itself over time. But even though I didn't intend to help this bottomless pit, someone else was far more anxious than I was. After all, I wasn't the only one anxious when the Earth Elemental Throne's repair time was tied to the stability of the Dragon World seal. Since there's a sucker paying the bill, I can participate. All I needed to do was act as a middleman and bring the Mage Country and Dragons' people to the scene to see the situation. Then, under the astonished gazes of the two major clients, I would make a long list of resources needed to repair the Earth Elemental Throne and wait for the two major clients to prepare all the resources. As for whether or not there was any embezzlement, would you believe me if I told you that I didn't leave anything behind? Of course, I also made some contributions in order to show my international spirit of sharing wealth and suffering together. For example, I handed over more than half of the Earth Elemental Throne's shards that Beifong had collected. I also gave away the remaining shards that I had digested in the frigid winter Earth. The Earth Elemental Lords, led by Ainslow, were the ones who helped the Elemental Throne's restoration go extremely smoothly. After the Elemental Civil War came to an end, the Earth Elemental Lords actually reached a consensus on the surface and looked forward to the swift birth of an elemental god. I didn't know what conditions Ainslow had promised me, or how she had convinced the Earth Elemental Lords, who were difficult to communicate with, to support her ascension to the throne. However, the end result was that all the Earth Elemental Lords opened up their own treasure vaults, and paid up all sorts of divine Earth Elemental items without caring about the cost. The quantitative change finally became a qualitative change. 10 days ago, an elemental pillar of light began to form. The Earth Elemental tide in every plane is rapidly decreasing. It would seem that the Elemental Throne is about to form. The Elemental Throne's restoration went quite smoothly thanks to all the Earth Elemental Lord's investment. However, this elemental throne that had been formed so quickly was obviously inferior to the original version that had taken tens of thousands of years to form. Anyone who ascended to the throne with this elemental throne would likely become the weakest elemental god for a long time. Considering how Omdoroken was still so strong despite being heavily injured to the point of death, the weakest elemental god in the Earth Elemental Plane wouldn't be any weaker than a powerful god. That's why, don't let Ainslow succeed in her ascension. Even if there must be an elemental god, the dumber and weaker the elemental god's ascension will be more in line with my expectations. This was a secret order that only I knew about. In order to avoid arousing suspicion, I didn't even personally go to the Earth Elemental Plane. I didn't want the others to ignore me and make me take the blame if something happened. Although I was indeed the one who should take the blame. For some reason, I kept feeling like my reputation was becoming more and more devilish. It's all the devil's, Roland's, fault. As for why I couldn't let the great stone sculptor ascend to the throne, wasn't she supposed to be my ally? Actually, although I had signed all sorts of contracts with her, I could sense her astonishing ambition and influence all the more. As the Stone Mother, she had previously been the leader of the Omdoroken Alliance. Many of her descendants were powerful elemental lords. She had left the elemental planes not to avoid the dangers of a new elemental war, but rather because no matter how the elemental war ended, she would always be the final victor. This was just like how she had been the most proactive in attacking Omdoroken. That was because if the elemental lord had fallen, it would naturally be her turn to ascend to the throne as the elemental lord for eternity. Her true reason for coming to the mortal plane was to gather information about the other planes. In fact, she even wanted to gather information about me, the person who had defeated Omdoroken. This wasn't something that an elemental lord who was only limited to the elemental planes would need to know. Doubtlessly, her goal definitely wasn't the earth elemental plane. As for her relationship with a certain someone, at the very least, after that certain someone discovered her ambition and true nature, this relationship became nothing more than an act. Later on, when I discovered that she had some faint connection to the lower planes, her so-called contract became an unreliable restriction. If the great stone sculptor truly ascended to the throne, this ambitious stone mother would likely become a new source of trouble. I don't care who you choose to ascend to the throne. Even if it's a rock or an insect, they'll still be stronger than her. As for the person who would carry out the secret order, only a certain someone who was becoming more and more mystical would be able to take on such a heavy responsibility. But judging from the current situation, not only had he accomplished this, he hadn't been discovered by anyone involved. In fact, the great stone sculptor even viewed him as a trustworthy ally. How did you do it? After that elemental throne is formed, it should automatically choose the most suitable elemental lord to ascend to become an elemental god. How did you twist this rule? The elemental throne was an inanimate object, after all. It was the incarnation of the dimensional will. However, it would only choose the strongest earth elemental creature within its range to wear the crown. Of course, the prerequisite was that the earth elemental creature was willing to ascend to the throne. However, it was impossible for inanimate objects to measure soft conditions like technology and knowledge. I reckoned that it would most likely look for a domain lord with the highest quantity and quality of earth element. Beifong Heralt still had a simple and honest smile on his face. I really didn't expect that he was the one who screwed over his lover, one of them. Speaking of which, if we were to count the number of lovers he had, this guy should have long since become the public enemy of all men, the target of the FFF group's God's execution. However, not a single person envied him for his main character aura and luck with women. What I'm doing is simply to have an existence in the mortal plane that's more suitable than her to become an elemental god. For example, a certain domain lord who wields the god equipment of Earth. I was rather astonished. I was the only one who knew about the existence of the god equipment of Earth. How did Beifong manage to obtain it? It's already good enough that your companions don't beat you up. Do you think they'll listen to your orders and work for you? Earth elemental artifact? Wasn't it in the wind elemental plane? Oh, I understand now, Camderon. Beifong nodded with a proud expression. This time, even he felt that he had done a wonderful job. He had accomplished such a great thing just by moving his lip. Some things were better understood than needed. There was no need to reveal everything. As the wind elemental god was the earth elemental god's enemy, Camderon naturally didn't want to see a new mortal enemy even more dangerous than Omdoroken appear. And since his second goal in this trip was to obtain the god equipment of wind, it was only natural that he would bring his companions to the wind elemental plane to obtain the god equipment of earth in exchange for it. Not to mention, he would also be able to screw over the great stone sculptor. So, when the elemental throne chose a new elemental god, the god equipment of earth was one of the targets you chose, but the great stone sculptor simply missed out on the elemental throne? Right, who did you choose? An elemental lord with the highest amount of earth element in the world. Not only that, he was the least threatening target. I was rather astonished by Beifeng's words. Who? Little Sand. Who's that? I've never heard of an elemental lord with that name before. Didn't you say that both bugs and rocks are fine? Your wish is my command. You've seen Little Sand before. He's the one that ate the most elemental thrones. Sandworm. You really dared to do it. Indeed, there was nothing more suitable for my goal than sandworms. They were pure creatures of the earth elemental plane. They would never consider leaving the plane, and they didn't have much intelligence, so they were of no threat at all. How did you do it? Little Sand had already devoured a large number of elemental throne shards, and he also devoured the god equipment of Earth. Along with his mountainous body, the sandworm had an astonishing amount of Earth element. And so, Little Sand was chosen. You don't know how much despair the other elemental lords felt when Little Sand suddenly crawled out of the ground and the elemental throne directly chose him. Nobody suspected that you were the one who did it? Of course. I've always been careful. The Sandworm King itself already has an astonishing amount of Earth element. Then, I told them that the elemental throne had been devoured by him. Most people thought that it was just a coincidence. You did a good job this time. Originally, if your lover became the Earth elemental god, you should have at least received some benefit. I'll find a chance to compensate you for your losses. It's fine. Little Sand is still my lover. All right then, I did my best to suppress the urge to toss him into a goblin cannon and shoot him into the sky as I looked at his brilliant and honest smile. You did a good job. Rest for a few days. I have other tasks for you. Right, why did you all come back so late? Everyone else is blaming you. Didn't you reveal your mission objective? No, at least Little Sand came to celebrate with me. He wanted a nest of his own godchildren, and I had to comfort the pitiful Ainslow. In the end, everyone ended up playing together, so we wasted some time. Godchildren? Playing together? All right then, I really shouldn't have asked, nor should I have imagined things. It seemed that the Earth elemental plane, the source of all planes, would become Beifeng's nest. Many of Beifeng's descendants would occupy an entire world. Just thinking about it made me feel more and more afraid, and I made up my mind to never go to the Earth elemental plane again. And so, I angrily roared with a serious expression. I'll give you a good task right now. Go to the Eternal Thunder tribe here, and become a Goodwill ambassador. Yep, they're your favorite beastheads. You can play with them however you want, as long as you stay away from me. Chapter 403. Perhaps nobody expected that Roland's expeditionary army would act as if they were living in peace and contentment after arriving in Dragon World. They built houses and farms. They built walls that were more than 10 meters tall, and metal barracks were connected together. They even built mage towers and biological laboratories. It was obvious that they were going to live here for a long time. As for the dragon's promise? Didn't we agree to delay the Titan giants from breaking the Earth Elemental God seal? Now that I've revived the Earth Elemental God, the elemental tide in Dragon World is beginning to balance out. Didn't that already happen? I haven't asked for payment from you yet. As for completely sealing the Earth Elemental God, do you really think that the Titan giants will obediently let us strengthen the seal? You should at least give us the ability to protect ourselves. Not to mention the Titan giants, even the running giants can easily kill us. I had originally intended to wait for the dragon's messengers to arrive and deal with them. As for whether they believed me or not, I didn't care if they believed me or not. This world didn't belong to them to begin with, so why would they care? Alright, I did have some bastardly logic, but sometimes this kind of bastardly logic was more effective. The dragons were the typical example of those with bigger fists being the boss. You're overthinking things. The dragons wouldn't care if you built a house here. They wouldn't care if short-lived species like you exist or not. And even if they were bored enough to care, with a normal dragon's concept of time, they'd only remember after sleeping for 300 years. Besides, Evelyn's words had some hidden meaning. That's not so ridiculous, is it? Besides what? Besides, our fourth sister is doing her best to cover up for you. In their eyes, you're working hard to balance out the elemental seal, so why would they come looking for you? Right, since you've already done part of it, you can ask for payment now. Alright then, this was what true allies should be like. Even if you didn't mention it, they would still think about your benefit. But 1 week later, another dragon descended from the sky. When I looked closely, I saw an old acquaintance on the dragon's back. Isn't this my good friend from the same school as me, Cade? Why did you come looking for me? Could it be? Heh, I can't believe you still remember your mission. It's that, could it be? Cade stroked his beard, taking advantage of his old age. His snow-white beard was so fluffy from washing that it seemed as if he really wanted to pull it out. You didn't come all the way to another world just to return the money, right? You're such a good person. I'm not here to pay you back. Oh no, I don't even owe you money. You've played this joke long enough. Are you still not tired of it? My disciples are all guessing how much money I owe you. Why are you always rushing me? Besides, you were the one who owed me money back then. TSK, you actually remembered. Ah, you did it on purpose. To think that I spent a large sum of money to hire an illusionist to perform a memory recall on you. Pfft, you really did it. It must feel good to have someone fiddle with your head, right? Apparently, the ninth ring arcana technique memory recall not only expends a large amount of energy, but it can also cause a person's mind to split. Are you still that snot-nosed brat? I think I remembered wrong. Bedwetting kid? Snot? Bedwetting? This old man will fight it out with you. From a certain standpoint, it was quite amusing to make the white-bearded old man so angry, especially when he was clearly younger than me but always took advantage of his age. If I didn't teach him a lesson, wouldn't that make me seem even less energetic and older than him? I'm still young. Tell me, Cade, what business do you have with me? If you want to borrow money, don't mention it. Talking about money will hurt my feelings. Huff, huff. The furious old man's veins were bulging on his forehead. After using a staff technique that even a fly wouldn't be able to kill, the old man could only lower his head and take deep breaths, using his staff as a walking stick. Why bother? First of all, I'm clearly at the warrior level, yet you, a mage, still want to fight me in melee combat. If you die just like that, I'll feel guilty. Yep, I'll feel guilty for about a minute. The old man took out a dark green potion from his robes and drank it in one gulp. He rubbed his chest for quite a while before staring at me. Do you really want to kill me that badly? Forget it, you've always been like this. No wonder everyone says that I shouldn't bicker with you. Let's talk about business first. You should know why I came here, right? I reached out with my index finger, picked my nose, and then lightly flicked it. I don't know. Are you still holding a grudge against me? Can you be a little more mature? Didn't you say that I'm a pervert who likes little girls? Why would I tell everyone about how you proposed to Amelia on the street? Wasn't what I said the truth? Ha! Do you think I don't know what you said? You clearly said that Amelia was in a coma due to some accident, and that she was still thinking about me while she was unconscious. Yet, I disregarded everything and came to the Cloud Tower to enjoy myself. As a result, all the female students who called me teacher all looked at me as if I were an ingrate the next day. That bit of luck I had with women was all gone. So you're still holding a grudge against me? Are you a child? You're already so old, yet you're still pretending to be young. You're already like this, yet you still dare to complain about having no luck with women in front of this old virgin. You're too shameless. Judging from the veins on Cade's forehead, if I continued teasing him, he would probably die from a brain hemorrhage. That was why I restrained myself slightly in our subsequent interactions. Actually, how could I not know why he came here? I knew from the moment I saw him. The Truth Symposium probably had a problem with me slacking off for such a long time. It was easy to guess where this problem came from. Either the Bardi Empire's diplomatic announcement, the Dragons' secret report, or the Truth Symposium's internal members objecting to me. Since the Truth Symposium sent my old friend to supervise me, that meant that the situation wasn't too bad. It was probably just some political consideration. I understand. I'll speed up the matter with the dragons. That's not the problem. It's that there's been a change in your other job. Another job. As expected, you forgot. I'm the Mage Country's ambassador to the Bardi Empire. Now that Bardi is facing a major problem, the southern and northern battlefronts have collapsed, Halent has lost the battle against the Holy Light's allied armies, and the undead have also lost the battle. The Truth Symposium wants me to tell you this news and request that you take action as soon as possible. They want you to meet with the dragons as soon as possible, and it'll be best if the dragons appear to stabilize the situation. We absolutely can't allow Barty to collapse just like this. Jinx, Super Jinx. Your system is currently considering whether or not to create a new title for you, Shipwrecking Demon. What does this have to do with ships? This title is written in yellow. I'm not Bailey. I've been on many ships before. Please call me, young lad. I have high hopes for you. Harlow's faint words and my system's malicious voice simultaneously echoed in my ears. However, I didn't have the time to think about all this. This was going to be fun. I strolled around on a tall metal platform in my laboratory, inspecting the latest developments in every laboratory. My old man was still nagging behind me, but the things in my mind were even more annoying. According to my secret agreement with Orlos, Barty absolutely couldn't lose, nor should they lose. If Barty's situation became unstable, then my secret agreement with Orlos would become useless, and my plan would be impossible to carry out. This meant that I needed to think of a way to help Barty. As for the undead, they lacked the determination to fight to the bitter end before the undead emperors arrived. Not only that, the wood spirits were dragging them down. Plus, the Barty Empire's citizens were quite resistant to Barty, and they had plenty of elite troops. Counterattacking might be difficult, but maintaining the front lines shouldn't be a problem. As for the eastern battlefront, based on my understanding of the Holy Church, this unexpected victory would cause the Holy Church to fall into a state of ecstasy. It would be almost certain that they would continue their crusade against the heretic. Orlos and I hadn't prepared for the possibility of the Holy Church losing this battle. Even if Halent suddenly becomes an idiot, he has several dozen dragons and dragon elders with him. How could he possibly lose? But now Halent had lost. I couldn't make any judgments until I had more concrete information. Still, I needed to at least try to salvage the situation. The problem was, I really can't leave right now. What's so important? That thing beneath your feet. The metal bridge we were on was built on top of a volcanic area. Underneath the bridge were gigantic white bones. Each bone was far larger than a so-called giant. We could only see a small portion of the bones as we looked around. Many staff members wearing protective gear were currently working on the bones. What's that? The Tiger God's rune. It's our greatest harvest here. It's the Eternal Thunder Tribe's original belief and ancestor. Just one of its ribs is more than 30 meters tall. If all of them stood up, they'd definitely be incredible mega monsters. From another source, it's highly likely that it was a pet of a Titan giant from back in the day. The most likely target is the fourth Titan giant, Eanes. We met him before at Oaktown. You're excavating its corpse? An ancient beast's corpse is indeed a valuable research material. However, you can just leave the work to your subordinates and go back to Dragon City to do your own work. Have you ever heard of an undead mage who can shout to stop when he's creating an undead creature? The summoning of the undead has already begun. If you stop now, such a top-quality material will be wasted. Something like resurrection? You're insane. Ha, you just realized?